Chapter 944. On the city walls of Tagmu City. When he saw Li Yuanba suddenly jump onto his horse and head for the city gate, the senior city guard was stunned. He wanted to break through the city gate of Tagmu City by himself. He was thinking too much. Thinking of this, the senior city guard of Tagmu City curled his lips in disdain and then shouted, "Pour the oil." As soon as the senior city guard of Tagmu City said this, the pot of boiling oil that had been pushed to the edge of the city wall was instantly overturned. Whoosh! A large amount of boiling oil gushed out and splashed toward Li Yuanba, who was rushing toward the city gate. In midair, Li Yuanba, who sensed the boiling oil falling from above his head, smiled coldly, and then his body shook. A buzzing sound was heard. A shield formed by Xiantian Qi instantly enveloped Li Yuanba. At the same time, the boiling oil fell. However, the moment it came into contact with Li Yuanba's shield, it was bounced back. On the city walls of Tagmu City, after seeing Li Yuanba easily block the boiling oil, the senior city guard of Tagmu City narrowed his eyes. Damn it! Was this the cultivation technique of the Great Han Dynasty's generals? Even boiling oil couldn't penetrate it. Just as the senior city guard thought of this, the deputy general beside him suddenly said, "Senior city guard, don't worry. Senior guard, don't worry. With just him alone, there's no way he can breach the Tagmu City. The pure iron city gate is half a meter thick." As soon as the deputy general said this, the senior city guard let out a long sigh and then said, That's true, but we still have to be careful. Go and send some men to block the city gates." "Yes, senior city guard." When the deputy general heard this, he hurriedly bowed and said. At this moment, Li Yuanba, who had leaped to the city gate of Tagmu City, raised the sledgehammer in his hands and swung it violently. "Open!" After a loud shout, the sledgehammer in Li Yuanba's hand instantly smashed onto the pure iron city gate of Tagmu City. Boom! Boom! After two loud bangs, the city walls of Tagmu City trembled for a moment. Then, the pure iron city gate of Tagmu City shattered and exploded into pieces of iron that filled the sky. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air instantly rang out. Poochie, Poochie, Poochie! The polar bear guards near the city gate were immediately pierced through by the fragments of the pure iron city gate. They died on the spot. On the walls of Tagmu City, this voice, the high-ranking city guard of Tagmu City, was first stunned. Then his expression changed drastically. At this moment, the city guard's deputy general's shocked words were heard. "Senior guard, the city gate has been breached." "I heard that." The high-ranking city guard's face darkened again when he heard that, and then he shouted sternly. As soon as the senior city guard finished speaking, the guards on the city wall instantly went into an uproar. How was that possible? A pure iron city gate. That is a pure iron city gate. A general of the Great Han Dynasty smashed the pure iron city gate by himself? I don't believe it either, but look, that general of the Great Han Dynasty has rushed in the city. The city gate has been breached. Won't we lose for sure? An oppressive and terrifying aura erupted on the city walls as the guards discussed among themselves. When the senior city guard of Tagmu City heard that, his already ugly expression became even uglier. In the next second, the senior city guard of Tagmu City directly shouted, "All of you, shut the F***CK up. There is only one city gate that has been breached. We still have a chance. As long as the armed forces of the Great Han Dynasty dare to enter the city, they will be turtles in a jar. Although the equipment of the armed forces of the Great Han Dynasty is very high grade, we are on the city wall, so we can easily attack them. We can shoot arrows, tens of thousands of arrows, and there will always be a hit. We can also smash them to death with rocks, burn them to death with kerosene. Yes, and don't forget, what is the crime of fleeing in the face of battle? Even if you escape and survive, you will be caught, and then your family will be implicated." When the deputy general of the city guard heard this, he immediately came back to his senses and hurriedly shouted. As soon as the deputy general of the city guard finished speaking, The faces of the guards who had just panicked suddenly changed. They had no choice but to change. This was the military law of the Polar Bear Empire. If you dare to escape, you can do so as long as you are not afraid of death and implicating your family. The senior city guard is right. We still have a chance. A guard suddenly shouted. Yes, yes, we still have a chance. When the senior city guard of Tagmu City heard this, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief and then shouted, quickly pass the order, let all the guards in the city get on the city wall. In addition, block the passage to the city wall for me. As soon as the senior city guard of Tagmu City finished speaking, 2 exclamations suddenly sounded. Senior city guard. The general of the Great Han Dynasty who broke into the city has climbed the city wall. Senior city guard. The cavalry of the Great Han Dynasty has already arrived at the foot of the city wall. When the senior city guard of Tagmu City heard this, his face suddenly changed, and then he hurriedly shouted, kill that general of the Great Han Dynasty. The rest of you, attack the cavalry outside the city. As soon as the senior city guard finished speaking, a scream of horror suddenly sounded. Senior city guard. The general of the Great Han Dynasty has climbed the city wall. Bang! A muffled sound of a collision suddenly rang out. Then, the guard who had just screamed was directly smashed into pieces by a millstone-sized hammer. At this moment, a large amount of blood and internal organs directly flew out, and then dyed the armor of the surrounding polar bear guards red. Go! All of you go! Kill him! When the senior city guard saw that Li Yuanba had really climbed the city wall, his face suddenly changed, and then he screamed. The voice of the senior city guard was still considered calm before, but at this moment, it took a 180-degree turn. His words were full of panic and fear. He couldn't help but be afraid. An existence who could break the city gate alone. What kind of concept was that? That wasn't fierce. That was abnormal. Originally, the senior city guard wanted to motivate his subordinates to rely on the human wave tactic to kill Li Yuanba. This way, he wouldn't have to face Li Yuanba. Who would have thought that just a few seconds after he ordered people to stop Li Yuanba from climbing the city wall, Li Yuanba rushed up the city wall with a giant hammer. As soon as the senior city guard's words fell, the guards couldn't help but gulp heavily. Li Yuanba glanced around at the polar bear guards who wanted to go up, but didn't dare to. He smiled coldly, then raised the giant hammer in his right hand and threw it fiercely. Bang, bang, bang. A series of collision instantly sounded, and then a group of guards was directly smashed by Li Yuanba's giant hammer. In the blink of an eye, the giant hammer was in front of the senior city guard. When the senior city guard saw this, his pupils suddenly shrank, and without thinking, he directly grabbed the deputy general beside him and blocked in front of him. Bang! Bang! After 2 sounds, the deputy general and the senior city guard were all smashed by Li Yuanba's giant hammer, and then saw their bodies directly shatter, and then they died on the spot. Chapter 945. Rumble. Thousands of horses galloped, and the earth rumbled. At this moment, Li Yuanba's 100,000 troops rushed into the Tagma city. Then, they violently rushed towards the polar bear army that had sensed that the city gate had been breached and were frantically rushing towards the city gate to provide support. In the next second, Li Yuanba's 100,000 troops and the guards at the front stabbed their long weapons in unison. Poochie, Poochie, Poochie! Hundreds of polar bear guard were instantly stabbed to death on the spot. Rumble. The war horses galloped, and no one in the 100,000 troops stopped and continued to move forward. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of collisions rang out in an instant. Then, a large number of polar bear guards were sent flying by the war horses. At the same time, the guards at the front of the 100,000 troops stabbed their long weapons again. Poochie, Poochie, Poochie! Hundreds of polar bear guards were stabbed to death on the spot. The Tagma city was a huge city, and the streets in the city were extremely wide. This also caused the charging mode of the 100,000 troops that had rushed into the Tagma city to be unaffected. The charge continued. The polar bear guards were like wheat, constantly being harvested and harvested. In just a few breaths of time, a strong smell of blood rose from the streets of the Tagma city. On the city walls of Tagmu City, Li Yuanba, who had finished off the thousands of polar bear guards on the city walls, as well as the high-ranking city guards and the deputy general of the city guards, with a single strike of his hammer, glanced at the remaining polar bear guards around him, whose eyes were filled with shock and fear. He raised the giant hammer in his left hand once again, and then mercilessly killed his way over. Don't kill me. I surrender. I surrender. High-ranking city guards, I'm willing to submit to the Great Han Dynasty. Don't kill me. Bang, bang, bang. A series of kneeling sounds directly sounded on the city wall. The polar bear guards had now collapsed. If the one who attacked them was just an ordinary general, this would be nothing. They would not be so afraid. And Li Yuanba was clearly not an ordinary general. How could these polar bear guards not be afraid? How could they not be afraid? As for the possibility of being hunted down by the emperor of the Polar Bear Empire after surrendering, or even endangering their families, these polar bear guards no longer thought about it. They only wanted one thing now, and that was to survive. Boom! With a swing of the hammer, his body exploded. Senior guard, I surrender. He really surrendered. Boom! With a smash of the hammer, his brain exploded, and his body turned into a blood-red meat patty with broken bones. The guards of the Polar Bear Empire on the city wall were begging for mercy, and they were very sincere. Unfortunately, Li Yuanba didn't have the slightest intention of showing mercy. He swung his hammer again and again, smashing one polar bear guard after another. Why? We all surrendered. Why are you still killing us? A polar bear guard, who found that Li Yuanba didn't intend to stop at all, suddenly changed his expression, and then he looked at Li Yuanba and screamed. He didn't understand why Li Yuanba, the general of the Great Han Empire, didn't stop after surrendering. As far as he knew, the Great Han Empire never killed captives. Unfortunately, what greeted him was still Li Yuanba's merciless hammer. Boom! With a face full of fear and confusion, the polar bear guard directly turned into pieces of flesh and blood, and then died on the spot. Soon, the guards of the Polar Bear Empire on the city wall were all killed by Li Yuanba. In the city, Li Yuanba's 100,000 troops had killed a street red. As far as the eye could see, the ground was full of corpses and blood. It looked like a slaughterhouse. 2,000 meters away, where the reincarnation Immortal City's army was. It's about time. Zhao Yunzheng glanced at Li Yuanba on top of the Tagma city and said with a smile. Hearing this, Zhang San hurriedly looked at Zhao Yun and said, Yunzheng, let's say this first. This time, you can't let your white horse righteousness lead the way. It's already at the mortal evolution state. Killing enemies won't improve much. After hearing Zhang San's words, Zhao Yun couldn't help but be stunned. Then, he said helplessly, Okay, good brother. How about this? Old Zhang will go first. Brothers, goodbye. Hearing Zhao Yun nod, Zhang San's big black face instantly bloomed like a flower. Without waiting for others to speak, he directly raised his hand and said to Zhang San, Huang Sheng, Dian Xiong, Gao Shun, Zhang Liao, and the other generals. After Zhang San finished speaking, he raised the snake spear in his hand and shouted, Little brothers, little ones, I, your senior guard, have gone to great lengths to give you another chance to show your faces. Don't disappoint me. Kill, kill, kill. An earth-shattering roar sounded instantly. Then, Zhang San's 100,000 troops followed closely behind Zhang San and charged towards the Tagma city. Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Huang Sheng, Gao Shun, Zhang Liao, Huang Su, and the other generals looked at each other and then shook their heads helplessly. There were many generals in Reincarnation Immortal City. However, in terms of shamelessness and love to drink, if Zhang San said that he was second, no one would dare to take first place. Uncle, the third to enter the city will be you. How about it? At this moment, Zhao Yun looked at Huang Sheng, who had recently joined Reincarnation Immortal City, and then smiled and cupped his fists. Huang Sheng's daughter, Philos Aureus, had already moved into the Reincarnation Immortal City's City Lord Manor. She was already considered one of the female masters of Reincarnation Immortal City. As Philos Aureus's father, Huang Sheng's seniority, no matter how it was calculated in the past, had to include Yi Chen now. At least, this was the case in front of the generals of Reincarnation Immortal City. It was also because of this reason that Zhao Yun addressed Huang Sheng as uncle. This was not humility, but a rule that had to be followed. This was because Zhao Yun's sister was also one of Yi Chen's wives. As soon as Zhao Yun finished speaking, the surrounding generals smiled and then cupped their fists at Huang Sheng. "Uncle, please." When Huang Sheng heard this, he shook his head helplessly and then said, "In that case, I'll take advantage of my seniority this time." After Huang Sheng finished speaking, he raised the long saber in his right hand and shouted, "Let's go! Kill! Kill! Kill!" After the deafening battle cries, 100,000 of Huang Sheng's guards followed Huang Sheng and charged toward Tagmu City. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea had passed, Huang Sheng led 100,000 guards and charged into Tagmu City. After a while, Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Gao Shun, Zhang Liao, Zhang Er, and the other generals smiled at each other. Then they raised the weapons in their hands and shouted, "Kill! Kill! Kill! Kill!" The deafening battle cries sounded again. Then the 11 million soldiers of Reincarnation Immortal City charged toward Tagmu City in a frenzy. Chapter 946. Reincarnation Immortal City, City Lord's Mansion. Yi Chen's divine sense enveloped the entire battlefield. When he heard the conversation of his subordinates, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Gao Shun, and Huang Sheng were getting along well. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about any internal strife when he pushed forward the construction of Reincarnation Immortal City in the future. Thinking of this, Yi Chen couldn't help but smile. At this moment, Gui Yi, who was looking at the three-dimensional map of the battlefield, suddenly looked at Yi Chen and bowed. "My lord, there seems to be something wrong with this Tagmu City." "Something's wrong?" When Yi Chen heard this, he could not help but be startled. When Gui Yi heard Yi Chen's question, he once again looked at the Tagmu City displayed on the three-dimensional map of the battlefield and bowed. "Yes, my lord. According to my observations, this Tagmu giant city appears to be very ordinary. However, if the towers on the city walls are connected together, it looks very much like the Great Blood Refinement Formation. However, if you look closely, there are some differences." As soon as Gua Yi finished speaking, Jia Fujian couldn't help but be taken aback. He then looked at Yi Chen and bowed. "My lord, according to my observations, there are also some problems with the stone statues placed in front of the main residences in the Tagma City. If they're connected together, they can form a blood-refining array. However, if you look closely, there are some differences." When Yi Chen heard Gua Yi and Jia Fujian's words, he couldn't help but be taken aback. Then he frowned. At this moment, Tianfeng bowed and said, "My lord, there seems to be a problem with the City Lord's Mansion in the Tagma City. According to my observations, there should be a soul-sealing array inside. However, it's different from the soul-sealing array that I know of." Why is Tong seeing the burning sky array? This can be seen from the residences in Tagmu City. Those residences appear to be in a mess. But if you connect every single one of them together, they will directly form the burning sky array. However, this burning sky array is a little different from the burning sky array that Tong knows. Pang Tong, who was at the side, suddenly said in surprise when he heard this, "Kun, what we saw was a sacrificial array." Chen Kun frowned and said. When Yi Chen heard the words of his military advisors, he frowned again. Then his primordial spirit moved, and his enormous consciousness instantly probed towards the Tagmu City. After a few breaths, Yi Chen's eyes suddenly widened. "Soul Catcher Idol. Why would a divine soul statue appear in Tagmu City?" The soul-absorbing godly statue was a special item that contained the remnant consciousness of a Kane god. Previously, when Yi Chen returned to the real world and destroyed the Liu clan, he encountered one. At that time, if Yi Chen had not been careful, it was very likely that he would have died in the hands of the soul-assimilating statue. It was for this reason that Yi Qin's consciousness had nearly cursed out loud when he had discovered that there was a soul-assimilating statue in an underground secret room that was only 10 square meters in size under the Tagma city. It was no wonder that Yi Qin was so angry. After all, if Yi Qin had discovered it too late, the reincarnation Immortal City's army would have charged into the Tagma city. If the soul-absorbing, godly statue had chosen this time to erupt, it would have devoured the entire 2.41 million reincarnation Immortal City's army. Even Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Huang Sheng, Gao Shun, and other military generals would not have been spared. This was not some alarmist talk. Even an Earth Immortal would have his soul completely sucked away by the soul-absorbing godly statue if he was not careful. Damn it, where did the Polar Bear Empire get their hands on this soul-absorbing godly statue? And they even placed it beneath the Tagmu city. Fortunately, the blood of the Polar Bear Empire's guards had not yet soaked into the ground. Otherwise, none of my troops would have survived at this thought. Yi Qin looked directly at the Tagmu city and shouted, "Don't resist!" As soon as Yi Qin's words fell, Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Huang Sheng, Li Yuanba, and other military generals, as well as all the reincarnation Immortal City guards, were all taken aback. At this moment, a huge force appeared out of nowhere. Then, it lifted the generals and guards of the reincarnation Immortal City and quickly flew into the sky. Then, it quickly flew out of the Tagma city. Within the Tagma city, the Polar Bear Empire's guards, who had been slaughtered to the brink of despair, were all stunned when they saw the reincarnation Immortal City's army, who had been wantonly wiping them out earlier, rise into the sky and fly away. They flew away? I think so. No wonder they are so powerful. They are the legendary immortals of the Great Han Dynasty. But, didn't they want to kill us all? Those who begged for mercy were killed too. Isn't it good that they left? Damn it, do you want to die? How is that possible? I don't understand. They could have killed us all, but they suddenly flew away. Just as the remaining soldiers in the Polar Bear City were discussing amongst themselves, the Eastern Players' army arrived at the Tagmu city. Looking at the reincarnation Immortal City's army in the sky, the Eastern Players were all stunned. Damn, am I seeing things? Yi Yu of Gojoseon's armed forces can fly? What are you seeing things for? Aren't they right there? Not only can they fly, but even their horses can fly. Sigh, I used to know that Yi Yu of Gojoseon was powerful, and I also knew that Yi Yu of Gojoseon's army was powerful. But this is too powerful. None of the players can fly now. Not only can Yi Yu of Gojoseon's subordinates fly, but even their war horses can fly. It's impossible for war horses to fly. I can still believe that humans can fly, but war horses aren't spiritual beasts and can't be improved. So, Yi Yu of Gojoseon's army can fly, not because they are strong enough to fly, but because Yi Yu of Gojoseon made a move. It can't be. He can make more than 2 million people and war horses fly at the same time. How strong is he? Could it be that Yi Yu of Gojoseon has become an immortal? It's not important whether he has become an immortal or not. What's important is why Yi Yu of Gojoseon's armed forces are flying back. Damn, you reminded me. Yi Yu of Gojoseon is now attacking Tagmu City. If I'm not wrong, something dangerous is going to happen in Tagmu City. Otherwise, why would Yi Yu of Gojoseon's army retreat? Just as the Eastern players were talking amongst themselves, the Tagmu city suddenly shook. Then, a large amount of black smoke suddenly rose from the ground. At the same time, shrill screams sounded from within Tagmu city. Reincarnation Immortal City, City Lord's Mansion. Yi Qin narrowed his eyes when he saw millions of soldiers and millions of polar bear citizens in Tagma City being devoured in the blink of an eye. The soul-absorbing statue this time was more dangerous than the previous one. Chapter 9:47. Yi Qin cannot be blamed for thinking that way. After all, although the soul-absorbing statue had taken the initiative to attack Yi Qin, it had not attacked the other players in the city where the Liu clan was located. This was not because the soul-absorbing statue was honest or wanted to protect the Liu clan, but because its attack range was only so large. Otherwise, the players who relied on the Liu clan to survive would have been devoured by the soul-absorbing statue. As for the soul-absorbing statue in the Tagma city, not only had it taken the initiative to attack, but had also enveloped the entire Tagmu city. Not only had it devoured everyone's flesh and blood, but it had also devoured everyone's souls. This soul-absorbing statue probably did not have an owner. Otherwise, the Tagma city would have become a four-city city long ago. Just as Ichin thought of this, the black smoke that had completely enveloped the Tagmu city suddenly began to condense. Then, it turned into a pitch-black black dragon that did not have a physical body, but looked exceptionally lifelike. The black dragon that the black smoke had turned into was not the dragon clan of Eastern legends, but the black dragon of Western legends. To be more precise, it was like a large lizard with wings. Of course, the black dragon was much more ferocious than the lizard. At least, the ferocious head, white teeth, and black scales were not something the lizard had. Damn it, the chaos statue contained the remnant thoughts of the 3,000 gods and demons that had been destroyed by Pangu. How did it transform into the appearance of a Western black dragon? Could it be that one of the 3,000 gods and demons was the dragon clan of Western legends? Just as Ichin thought of this, a dragon's roar that shook the heavens and earth sounded from the black dragon's mouth. Roar! The dragon's roar was full of a violent and destructive aura. Sensing this, Yichun smiled coldly. Remnant thoughts were remnant thoughts. Even if it had devoured the flesh and souls of millions of living beings, it still did not have spiritual intelligence. Just as Yichun thought of this, the black dragon that had let out a dragon's roar looked straight at the reincarnation immortal city. Then with a boom, it flapped its wings and flew up. Seeing this, Yichun's eyes narrowed fiercely. It must have sensed that the reincarnation immortal city was the place with the densest life energy, so it wanted to devour the city. At the thought of this, Yichun snorted coldly. With a wave of his right hand, the dark and thick god-slaying weapon appeared instantly. In the next second, Yichun soared into the sky and charged straight at the black dragon that was flying over from Tagmu City. At the location of the Eastern player army. F***CK. Look, that was a Western black dragon. F***CK. Why does the Polar Bear Empire have something like this? Who the hell knows? But I have a feeling that Yu of Gojoseon getting his army out of Tagma City is probably related to this black dragon. So you're saying that this black dragon is very awesome and very powerful. It's very possible. Don't forget, Yu of Gojoseon's army is very powerful, but Yu of Gojoseon didn't leave his army in Tagma City. Look, Yu of Gojoseon is flying out of Reincarnation Immortal City. Just as the Eastern players were discussing amongst themselves, Yichun, who was rushing toward the black dragon, was surrounded by a layer of red and white flames. In the next second, Yichun and the black dragon collided head-on. In an instant, the black dragon opened its mouth and sprayed something at Yichun. Boom! A pitch-black mass of air was instantly sprayed out of the black dragon's mouth, and then it crashed toward Yichun at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Yichun waved the god-slaying weapon in his right hand without hesitation. With a bang, the black mass of air was instantly smashed by the god-slaying weapon. At this moment, the smashed black mass of air instantly turned into hundreds of black air arrows and shot straight toward Yichun. Seeing this, Yichun smiled coldly. Then, with a thought, a pure white mass of Grand Sun primordial fire appeared out of thin air, and then it exploded with a boom. In the next second, hundreds of Grand Sun primordial fire exploded and collided with the black air arrows that were shooting toward Yichun. Boom, boom, boom. Dense explosions sounded instantly. Then, the black mass of air was seen exploding, and in the blink of an eye, it was burned into nothingness. The Red Lotus Hellfire couldn't do anything to the remnant consciousness of the innate god demon, but the Grand Sun primordial fire was different at this thought. the god-slaying weapon in Yi Chen's right hand vibrated, and with a buzz sound, the grandson primordial fire was instantly attached to the god-slaying weapon. In the next second, Yi Chen stabbed the black dragon with the god-slaying weapon in his right hand. With a poochie sound, the thick black god-slaying weapon covered in grandson primordial fire stabbed directly into the black dragon's head. Roar! After the dragon's painful roar, an extremely violent explosion sounded instantly. Boom! The black dragon, which had been majestic just a moment ago, exploded immediately. In the blink of an eye, it was enveloped by the grandson primordial fire. At the location of the Eastern player's army, Holy *T. The Underworld King, Yi, is not just a little ferocious. That was the black dragon, and it was taken care of by the Underworld King Yi with just one strike of his weapon. Yeah, when I saw the black dragon's domineering aura just now, I thought he was really awesome. Who knew that he would be defeated by Yi Yu of Gojoseon in one move? That's for sure. F***, think about it. Yi Yu of Gojoseon even swallowed the right hand of the god of light before. What's so strange about him killing a big lizard? I already expected this outcome. Who is Yi Yu of Gojoseon? He's the #1 player in the East. No, he's the strongest player in the world. He's even able to tame the howling celestial dog. How can he not defeat the big lizard in the West? Just as the players were discussing how Yi Chen had defeated the black dragon in such a simple and violent manner, the black dragon, who had been mercilessly burned, turned into nothingness with an indignant roar. At this moment, the Tagmu city suddenly shook. Then, a black pillar of air shot up into the sky and arrived in front of Yi Chen in the blink of an eye. There was actually the remnant consciousness of an innate god demon. Yi Chen, who had instantly sensed the origin of the black pillar of air, stabbed the black pillar of air with the god-slaying weapon in his right hand without hesitation. Boom! The air instantly exploded. At the same time, an extremely mysterious aura appeared from the god-slaying weapon. Then, the black light on the god-slaying weapon flashed explosively. No! A roar of disbelief and panic instantly rang out. At this moment, the black and thick god-slaying weapon suddenly shook. Then, the black pillar of air was directly devoured by the god-slaying weapon. Seeing this, Yi Chen let out a long breath. A soul-absorbing statue actually hid the remnant consciousness of two innate gods. No wonder it had no master, its attack range was so large. At this thought, Yi Chen moved his feet and instantly arrived in the sky above the Tagmu city. Glancing at the mummified corpses all over the city, Yi Chen pointed the god-slaying weapon at the ground and waved it in the air. Swish! There was a sound. The main street of the Tagmu city was instantly cut open, revealing a secret chamber. Glancing at the soul-absorbing statue on the stone table in the secret chamber, Yi Chen flicked his left hand in the air. A ball of true sun fire instantly flew toward the soul-absorbing statue. The moment the true sun fire touched the soul-absorbing statue, the statue immediately burst into flames. In the blink of an eye, it was burned into nothingness. Ding! Congratulations to player for killing innate God's remnant consciousness X2. Special reward to player Yi Chen, 20 million innate merit points. As soon as the system's notification ended, a golden light suddenly flashed behind Yi Chen's head. Then, a golden halo appeared directly behind Yi Chen's head and rapidly expanded. At this moment, an extremely mysterious force appeared out of thin air and rushed directly into Yi Chen's primordial spirit in his purple mansion. At the same time, Yi Chen's perception, primordial spirit, and physical body improved by a notch. Sensing this, Yi Chen couldn't help but smirk. Indeed, just like before, killing the remnant consciousness of an innate god could give him innate merit points. Although he wasn't sure how the soul-absorbing statue appeared in the Tagma city, the innate merit points were real. Chapter 948. Innate merit could suppress one's luck, increase one's comprehension, increase one's cultivation speed, and increase one's luck. If one had enough innate merit, no matter how evil they were, they wouldn't even be able to get close to them. It could be said that the more innate merit one had, the more benefits one would receive. Otherwise, Yichen wouldn't be so excited. Although he had killed a few million less polar bear empire guards, he had obtained 20 million innate merit points. This was a very good deal. Thinking of this, Yichen couldn't help but smile. At this moment, a ding sounded from where the soul-absorbing idol had disappeared, and a red crystal appeared. When Yichen saw this scene, he was stunned for a moment. Then his eyes opened wide. Could it be? Thinking of this, Yichen raised his left hand and grasped at the air. With a whoosh, the red crystal that had just appeared was instantly grabbed by Yichen. At this moment, the system's notification sounded. Ding! Congratulations to player Yichen for obtaining a beast over God's divinity, blank, X1. As soon as the system's notification ended, Yichen was stunned. Damn, it really was a divinity, and a blank over God's divinity at that. But what kind of beast over God was this? Although Yichen hadn't been to the Western mythological world in his previous life, Yichen knew about the gods of the Western mythological world. For example, the goddess of war, the goddess of wisdom, and so on. As for the beast over God, Yichen had never heard of it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so surprised. Since the beast over God's divinity had appeared, it meant that this over God's divinity existed. Forget it. I'll just give it to Lucifer's subordinates to use. When the time came, with a group of over-gods working hard, it would definitely be exciting to go to the Western mythological world. Thinking of this, Yichen's mind moved, and he called out, Meng Pa. As soon as Yichen's words fell, a black vortex suddenly appeared not far in front of Yichen. Then, Meng Pa, who had just left not long ago, appeared here. After opening her eyes, Meng Pa looked at Yichen with some confusion and called out, Husband. After hearing Meng Pa's words, Yichen couldn't help but smile. You can take this little toy to the Nether Mansion and give it to one of Lucifer's subordinates. Lucifer can choose who to give it to. A little toy, Granny Meng said, somewhat puzzled. Yichen casually handed the beast-type Sovereign Spark to Granny Meng. Meng Pa took it and glanced at it. Then, she was stunned. After coming to her senses, Meng Pa's eyes lit up. She looked at Yichen and said, Husband, this is not bad. With this chief god's divinity, we can create another chief god of the Western mythological world. When Yichen heard this, he nodded with a smile and said, That's right. I'll leave this matter to you. When Meng Pa heard this, she smiled sweetly and said, Okay, husband. After she finished speaking, she was stunned. After Meng Pa finished speaking, she looked at the golden merit ring behind Yichen's head that had yet to disappear. Husband, when did you obtain innate merit? It's not much, but it's not little either. When Yichen heard this, he couldn't help but smile and say, I got it from killing the remnant wills of 3 innate gods. When Meng Pa heard Yichen's words, she was stunned. Then she said with great joy, Husband, you're indeed the son of destiny. In the Eldritch world, the liches and the monster race are all looking for the remnant wills of the 3,000 innate gods. They want to accumulate innate merit by killing these remnant wills. They're all looking for the remnant wills of the gods. When Yichen heard Meng Pa's words, he was stunned. He hurriedly looked at Meng Pa and asked, There are 3,000 remnant wills of the gods? None of them have been found? Yes, husband. There are indeed 3,000 god-demon remnant consciousnesses. However, there is no place for the god-demon remnant consciousnesses in the desolate world. The moment they appear, they will be killed. Therefore, they are hidden very deeply. It is very difficult to find them. Hearing this, Meng Pa shook her head and said, When Yichen heard this, his eyes lit up. F***, there really are 3,000 innate gods' remnant wills. Moreover, the mighty figures in the Eldritch world don't know that the innate gods' remnant wills are hidden in the soul-absorbing statue. In Yichen's previous life, the soul-absorbing statue had been circulating among the players. It was often used to plot against others, and every plot was accurate. If it encountered a ruthless person, it was not an empty promise to kill millions of people in one go. This was also the reason why Yi Chen knew about the soul-absorbing statue. It couldn't be helped. The soul-absorbing statue was too insidious. No one knew about it at first, but after a long time, the secret could not be hidden. Of course, this was not important. What was important was that the remnant wills hidden in the soul-absorbing statue could not be destroyed. As a result, even until Yi Chen's rebirth, no one knew that destroying the innate God's remnant wills would give one innate merit. And now, although Yi Chen knew that destroying the innate merit would give him innate merit, he did not think of collecting the soul-absorbing statue and obtaining a large amount of innate merit. This was because in Yi Chen's opinion, there should not be many innate God's remnant wills or soul-absorbing statues. Who would have thought that the truth was not so? F***CK. He had to be careful with the soul-absorbing statue in the future. One statue was worth 10 million innate merit. If there were 3,000 of them, that would be a huge amount. If he could really collect all 3,000 innate God's remnant wills and destroy them, the benefits would be huge. At this thought, Yi Chen's eyes lit up. F***CK, it's settled then. Husband, do you know where the innate God demon is hiding? Mengpa asked after a slight pause when she saw Yi Chen's expression. When Yi Chen heard this, he nodded and said, "They are hidden in the soul-absorbing statue." Mengpa had become Yi Chen's woman and was loyal to Yi Chen. There was no need for Yi Chen to hide anything. After hearing Yi Chen's words, Mengpa was stunned for a moment. Then, she hurriedly looked at Yi Chen and said, "Hubby, although the true fire of the sun can destroy most of the innate God's remnant wills, there are still some that can't be destroyed, especially the innate God's remnant wills that have made great achievements in the great Tao of fire. If you encounter them, you must be careful." "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." Yi Chen's heart warmed when he heard this. Then he said softly. Mengpa smiled sweetly and said, Hubby, don't forget about the soul-absorbing statue. Husband, don't tell anyone about the soul-absorbing statue. Otherwise, if it is spread to the untainted land, the soul-absorbing statue will be found by the experts of the sorcerer tribe and the demon tribe. At that time, it will affect your plan to obtain primordial merits. Okay. When Yi Chen heard that Meng Po excluded the sorcerer tribe, his heart warmed again. Then, he nodded heavily and said, "Yes." When Meng Po heard this, she smiled again and kissed Yi Chen hard. Then, she said, "Hubby, I'm going back to the Yu mansion." Chapter 949. Yi Chen nodded. At this moment, Yi Chen suddenly thought of something and hurriedly said, "Wait." With that, Yi Chen waved his right hand, and the void stone appeared in an instant. A rare treasure ring also appeared in Yi Chen's hand. Looking at the ring and the void stone in his hand, Yi Chen willed the grandson primordial flame to appear and envelop the ring and the void stone. At the same time, an aura that belonged to the great Tao of space suddenly appeared on Yi Chen's body and rushed toward the grandson primordial flame. After a few breaths, the space stone disappeared, and the flames also dissipated, revealing a completely different ring. Yi Chen smiled as he glanced at the ring in his hand. He waved his right hand, and a large amount of fruits and 100-flower wine flew over from Reincarnation Immortal City. After that, Yi Chen stored all of them into the storage ring that he had just refined. In the next second, Yi Chen willed 1,000 pieces of enlightenment tea and a rare treasure tea set appeared in an instant and were stuffed into the storage ring by Yi Chen. Looking at the storage ring that was not full yet, Yi Chen willed it, and 100,000 enlightenment stones appeared in an instant and were put into the storage ring by Yi Chen. Meng Po, who was watching Yi Chen busying himself, smiled sweetly when she saw this. At this moment, Yi Chen waved his right hand, and a vermilion god-level face retaining fruit appeared in Yi Chen's right hand. Looking at the god-level face retaining fruit and the storage ring in his hand, Yi Chen let out a long breath and handed them to Meng Po. "Thank you, husband." Meng Po took the storage ring and the god-level face retaining fruit and gave it to Yi Chen. She was very happy. Yi Chen touched his lips and nodded with a smile. Then he said, "That's right. You are a Daluo Jinxian. Although you can easily open up your own space, you can't have one ring for each of them. However, the ring is still a little rough because of the materials. I will refine it for you in the future when I have better materials. The symbolic value of the ring was greater than its practical value, at least in Yi Chen's opinion. It was also for this reason that Yi Chen had specially refined the rings for the women. Now, Mengpa had also become Yi Chen's woman. Yi Chen naturally couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. He didn't refine a ring that symbolized love for Mengpa. When Mengpa heard this, she looked in the direction of the reincarnation immortal city and nodded her head happily. When Mengpa followed Yi Chen, she was already a golden immortal. It was simply too easy for her to investigate reincarnation immortal city. It was also for this reason that Mengpa had long known that Yi Chen had many partners. For Mengpa, there was nothing unacceptable about this. Otherwise, she would have alienated Yi Chen because of this. She wouldn't even help Yi Chen. Seeing Mengpa nod her head, Yi Chen smiled and continued. Although the god-level youth-retaining fruit isn't precious and can't help in cultivation, it has the miraculous effect of retaining one's youthful looks. As for the enlightenment stone in the ring, it can be used to enter the enlightenment mode. It can be used to refine spiritual treasures, comprehend cultivation methods, understand rules, and even great Taoists. By the way, those tea leaves are enlightenment tea. If you have nothing to do, you can use them to make tea. I have prepared a tea set for you. If you like to drink, the 100 Flowers wine should satisfy your taste buds. As for the fruits, they were plucked from the immortal level fruit trees when Reincarnation City was upgraded to Reincarnation Immortal City. If you are bored, you could take them out and have a taste. Yi Chen continued to blabber on until this point. Just as he was about to continue, Mengpa's mouth covered his mouth. After a long and deep kiss, Mengpa leaned her head back slightly and looked into Yi Chen's eyes. She said with incomparable affection, "Brother Yi, to be able to meet my husband, I have no regrets in this life." After hearing Mengpa's affectionate words, Yi Chen couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. He then touched Mengpa's fair and delicate face and said, "There is no such thing as a life. Your future will be with me. No one can change my decision." Mengpa's heart warmed when she heard this. She then looked at Yi Chen and said, "Husband, it's getting late. I should return to the Yu mansion. Go ahead. Remember to eat the god-level, youth-retaining fruit." Yi Chen nodded and said. Mengpa nodded gently and ate the god-level, youth-retaining fruit in her hand. After taking a deep look at Yi Chen, Mengpa put on the ring that Yi Chen had given her and gave Yi Chen a sweet smile. In the next second, Mengpa turned into a cloud of black smoke and disappeared without a trace. Looking at where Mengpa had left, Yi Chen let out a long breath and flew straight back to Reincarnation Immortal City. After returning to Reincarnation Immortal City, Yi Chen looked directly at the Reincarnation Immortal City's army and shouted, "Split up. One army, one road. Wipe out all the cities in the Polar Bear Empire." After Yi Chen finished speaking, Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Huang Sheng, Li Yuanba, Gao Shun, and the other generals' faces turned solemn. They then cupped their fists and bowed to Reincarnation Immortal City. "Yes, my lord." In the next second, Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Huang Sheng, Li Yuanba, and the other generals led their 100,000 troops and charged towards Tagma City. After entering the Tagma City, the Reincarnation Immortal City's army quickly rushed out from the other 3 city gates of the Tagma City. Then, they immediately split up and headed towards the Polar Bear Empire in more than 10 directions. After the Reincarnation Immortal City's army left, the Eastern players rushed into Tagma City. F***CK. F***CK. There's so many dried corpses on the ground. That scare me to death. F***CK. Did the Black Dragon make these dried corpses? Who else could it be? Stop talking nonsense. Hurry up and pick up the items and follow them. If we're too slow, the equipment and skills that Yi Yu of Gojosian doesn't will all be refreshed. Yes, hurry up and pick them up. While the Eastern players were engaged in a heated discussion, The gigantic island that carried the reincarnation immortal city slowly flew into the depths of the Polar Bear Empire. Death was the eternal element of war. The reincarnation immortal city's army split up into more than 10 directions. They attacked cities and plundered lands. Corpses were strewn everywhere and blood flowed like rivers. Time passed bit by bit. The teleportation portals connecting the various cities of the Polar Bear Empire to the capital of the Polar Bear Empire lit up again and again. Urgent battle reports were constantly sent to the Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire, causing the entire court to be shocked. Bam! The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire slammed the battle reports on the table. Then, he stood up abruptly and shouted, "Damn it! How can the Great Han armed forces be so strong? Who can tell me?" Chapter 950. When the Polar Bear Empire's civil and military officials heard the Polar Bear Emperor's words, they all looked at each other, then lowered their heads. They also wanted to know why the Great Han armed forces were so strong, but no one told them. The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire became even more irritable when he saw the silence of all the civil and military officials. Useless things. The Great Han armed forces are about to attack. Why aren't you saying anything? Aren't you usually good at talking? The officials of the Polar Bear Empire fell silent again. Seeing this, the Polar Bear Emperor's face turned ashen. At this moment, a fat middle-aged man suddenly stepped out of the ranks and looked at the Polar Bear Emperor, saying, "Let's go. Your Majesty, the one attacking our Polar Bear Empire this time is Yu of Beach of the Great Han Empire. It is said that this person is good at war. Not only did he destroy Jibian, but he also destroyed Tintu. Although our Polar Bear Empire is stronger than these two countries, I'm afraid we don't have the strength to fight against Prince Yu of Han." The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire's livid face turned even more livid when he heard this. The next second, the Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire stared at the fat man with fire in his eyes. "Zoros, what do you want to say? Surrender?" The plump middle-aged man, named Zoros, shook his head and said, "Your Majesty, we won't go so far as to surrender. However, we can marry the princess of the Polar Bear Empire to the Emperor of the Great Han Empire. This way, the Polar Bear Empire will have a chance to recuperate." The moment Zoros' words fell, the eyes of the officials of the Polar Bear Empire lit up. They hurriedly bowed and said, "Your Majesty, we agree with Prince Zoros' suggestion." "Damn it, don't you know that Princess Ashali is only 5 years old this year?" Hearing this, the Polar Bear Empire's emperor's eyes were filled with anger. Then he roared loudly, "Damn it!" When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he sighed. "My dear brother, compared to the 100-year foundation of the Polar Bear Empire, sacrificing a princess is nothing. Zoros, why don't you marry off your daughter?" When the Polar Bear Emperor heard this, his face darkened again. Lung Binbin looked at Zoros and asked. When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he smiled and said, "Your Majesty, my daughter has already married the son of the Great Guard Robins. I can't go through with the marriage." "Enough!" The Polar Bear Emperor's eyes narrowed when he heard this, and he shouted sternly. When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he glanced at the Emperor and said seriously, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. If we continue to hesitate, more cities in the Polar Bear Empire will be destroyed by Prince Yu of Han. At that time, even if we agree to the marriage alliance, the Polar Bear Empire will not be able to recuperate. We implore Your Majesty to reconsider." When the officials and generals heard this, they all looked at each other and then bowed. When the Polar Bear Emperor heard this, his chest tightened, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. After shaking a few times, the Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire sat down on the throne with a bang. At this moment, the Polar Bear Emperor was furious, but no matter how angry he was, he couldn't say anything. This was because all the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were in favor of the marriage alliance with Great Han. "Ashali, father has let you down." The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire only had one descendant, the 5-year-old princess that he had mentioned. He originally wanted to nurture this princess into the Polar Bear Empire's empress, but now his thoughts were destroyed. After a short silence, the polar bear emperor instantly aged more than 10 years. In the next second, the polar bear emperor looked at Prince Zoros and said, "I'll leave this matter to you. I'm tired, so I'm going back to rest." When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he smiled and said, "Yes, your majesty." When the Polar Bear Emperor heard this, he got up and left the palace. Just as the Polar Bear Emperor left the palace, all the civil and military officials of the Polar Bear Empire smiled. It's all thanks to Prince Yu of Han. Otherwise, our great Polar Bear Empire would have been ruled by a woman. Yeah, letting a woman rule is simply humiliating us. That's right. While the civil and military officials were cheering, Prince Zoros clapped his hands and indicated for everyone to be quiet. After the civil and military officials quieted down, Prince Zoros said, "Kiggle, prepare 2 letters of credence. One for Prince Yu of Han and one for the Emperor." 2. The civil official named Kiger couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this and asked. Prince Zoros nodded and said, "That's right. That's right, there are 2. The marriage proposal is for the Emperor of the Great Han Dynasty, while the proposal for the King of the Great Han Dynasty is to show our sincerity. Moreover, it has to be 200% sincerity. Otherwise, the Polar Bear Empire will be destroyed by the King of the Great Han Dynasty before the letter even reaches the Great Han Dynasty." When Prince Zoros finished speaking, the civil and military officials of the Polar Bear Empire froze. Prince Zoros is right. Prince Yu of Han is too good at fighting. If we don't make him stop, our Polar Bear Empire might really be in danger. Indeed, but what do we have to prepare to show our sincerity? When Prince Zoros heard this, he smiled and said, "Our Polar Bear Empire is rich in beauties, so we naturally have to prepare a large number of beauties for Prince Yu of Han. Moreover, they have to be virgins. I heard that the Great Han Empire places great importance on the chastity of women. If they aren't virgins, there might be a negative effect," a civil official hurriedly said. "Not only virgins, but they also have to be beauties with status," a general added. Prince Zoros nodded and said, "That's right. That's why each family has to have a daughter, and at least 3. When the civil and military officials of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, they all looked at each other and nodded. Good. Hearing this, Prince Zoros smiled and looked at the senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire, Robies, and said, "Robies, go and gather all the armed forces in the city. As for the poor, don't care if they live or die. All right, don't forget to chase all the players out of the city. These people aren't easy to control, and they can easily cause chaos." Chapter 9:51. Prince Zoros, it doesn't matter if we expel the Inhumans. They won't really die. However, if we don't care about the poor, there won't be anyone to farm in the Polar Bear Empire. Senior Guard Robies was slightly taken aback when he heard this. Prince Zoros smiled faintly and said, "The Confucian religion is the Confucian religion. The Han Dynasty talks about Confucian culture, so they won't attack the poor of the Polar Bear Empire. However, what you said is not unreasonable. How about this? We'll allow the poor to use the teleportation formation, but the teleportation location can only be outside the capital." All right. Senior Guard Robies was taken aback when he heard this. After he regained his senses, he nodded and hurriedly left the main hall. Prince Zoros glanced at Robies, then looked at the officials in the main hall and said, "All right, prepare yourselves. All right, go and prepare. Remember, it has to be a virgin, and it has to be your direct child." All right. All the officials nodded in unison when they heard this. After that, they left the main hall one by one. In the hinterland of the Polar Bear Empire, after the reincarnation of Mortal City's army swept through hundreds of cities, they encountered many empty cities. Noticing this, the generals of the reincarnation of Mortal City increased their marching speed without hesitation. Then, they rushed towards the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. Reincarnation Immortal City, City Lord's Mansion. Yi Chun, who had used his divine sense to scan the entire Polar Bear Empire, looked in the direction of the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. Then, he waved his right hand, and the space in front of the army suddenly distorted. In the next second, the reincarnation of Mortal City's army rushed into the distorted space and disappeared. 100 miles away from the capital of the Polar Bear Empire, the space suddenly distorted. Then, the reincarnation of Mortal City's army rushed out from it. In an instant, a large number of curses and scoldings could be heard. Those damn natives! How dare they expel us? Damn it! We came all the way to this damned capital to fight against Yi Chun, but this is what we get in return. Let's go back and kill those damn nobles and the emperor. Rumble! Tens of thousands of horses galloped and the earth rumbled. The appearance of the reincarnation of Mortal City's army attracted the attention of the players of the Polar Bear Empire. They turned around to look at the army. When the players of the Polar Bear Empire saw the sudden appearance of the reincarnation and Mortal City's army, they were stunned for a moment before an uproar broke out. F***CK, am I seeing things? Yi Chen's armed forces didn't use the teleportation portal and came here directly? You didn't see wrongly. D***M in it. How is this possible? How can Yi Chen's armed forces be so fast? What should we do? The combat power of Yi Chen's armed forces is terrifying. Not only can they not kill him, but they can't even put up a fight. What's there to be afraid of? That was in the past. Now that all of us players are here, we can easily crush Yi Chen's armed forces. That's right. There's nothing to be afraid of. Let's fight them. Don't forget, we're players. Even if we die, we won't really die. Motherf asterisk cur. Your daddy here can't accept this. Motherf asterisk cur. These damn natives are chasing us away, yet we still have to risk our lives for them. So what if you can't accept this? We can't let Yi Chun destroy the Polar Bear Empire, right? Motherf asterisk cur. Even though I'm angry, let's wait until we stop Yi Chun before we settle the score with those damn natives. Just as the players of the Polar Bear Empire were cursing one another, a large number of poor people were teleported out from the teleportation portal outside the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. Before long, there were tens of millions of poor people. Seeing this, the players of the Polar Bear Empire were stunned. Then, their faces darkened. These F***king native nobles don't treat the poor people as human beings at all. What's there to be angry about? Wasn't it like this in ancient times? With these poor people around, Yi Chun won't go on a killing spree. That's impossible. Yi Chen's armed forces kill everyone wherever they go. It doesn't matter if they're players, guards, or poor people. Not a single one of them is left alive. That's because there aren't many of them. Look at how many people there are here. Just us players alone are in the hundreds of millions. As for the poor people, it won't take long for them to break through the billions. What if Yi Chen's army really does that? That can't be. Wouldn't that make Yi Chun a cold-blooded butcher? Only a deranged person would do such a thing. Just as the players of the Polar Bear Empire were discussing the mass teleportation of the poor natives, the space in the sky suddenly distorted. Then, they saw a huge island appear in the sky above the battlefield. F***CK. What's that? It's probably an island. But how can an island fly? Could it be some kind of advanced technology or a divine artifact? Who knows? Damn it, I finally understand why Yi Chen's armed forces can suddenly appear here. It must be because this island has a teleportation function. Polar Bear Empire Palace, say. Guard hurriedly ran into the main hall and bowed to Prince Zoros. Your Highness, the Great Han's armed forces have arrived outside the capital, and above the Great Han's armed forces, a flying island has appeared. What? Prince Zoros, who was waiting for his subordinates' orders, was stunned when he heard this. Then he shouted in shock. The flying island shocked Prince Zoros, but the sudden appearance of the Great Han's armed forces shocked him even more. This was because he had just sent 2 teams to the teleportation array to deliver 2 letters of credence. One to the Great Han Emperor Lu Hong, and the other to Yi Chun. But now, Yi Chen's army had arrived outside the capital. How were they going to deliver the letters of credence? When he thought about how Yi Chen's army was about to attack the capital because they didn't receive the letters of credence, Prince Zoros couldn't remain calm. Quick, go inform Kiggle and prepare another letter of credence for Prince Yuhan. Then inform all the ministers to bring the chosen daughters to the city walls. The moment Zoros finished speaking, the guard hurriedly bowed. "Yes, Your Highness." After the guard finished speaking, he hurriedly ran out and conveyed Zoros's order. "Damn it, how could it be so fast?" Prince Zoros said with a pale face as he looked at the guard who left. At this moment, a group of civil and military officials ran into the main hall excitedly. "Your Highness Prince Zoros, we just received news that there are hundreds of millions of mutants outside the capital. The number of commoners has reached 800 million. We don't have to fear Prince Yu of Han or Yi Qin anymore." Chapter 952. When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he was taken aback. He then asked, "That many?" "Yes, Your Highness. There really are that many," a burly official said excitedly. Zoros' eyes lit up when he heard the answer. He then said excitedly, "Let's go. Let's take a look at the city wall." Okay. When the civil and military officials heard this, they responded with smiles on their faces. After they finished speaking, they followed Prince Zoros up the city walls. Outside the city, where the reincarnation Immortal City Army was. "This polar bear has quite a lot of cubs," Third Zhang said excitedly as he glanced at the boundless army of polar bear players and indigenous polar bear natives. When Dian Xiong heard this, he looked at Zhang San and said, "Ida, do you want to compete with me later?" Zhang San laughed and was about to agree when Zhao Yun said, "The Lord wants to compete with me. The Lord wants a quick battle. Are you too sure you want to compete?" Dian Xiong laughed awkwardly and pretended not to say anything. He looked at the Polar Bear Empire's army in the distance with a serious expression. While Dian Xiong was putting on an act, Zhang San rolled his eyes at Zhao Yun and said, "Zhao Yun, you're too harsh on me. Yunzheng, you're too good at hurting people. This won't do. You have to make up for my hurt heart." When Zhao Yunzheng heard Zhang San's shameless words, the corners of his mouth involuntarily twitched. He then shut his mouth and pretended not to hear anything. When Zhang San saw Zhao Yun's expressionless face, he laughed and said, "Yunzheng, don't pretend you didn't hear me. 3 bottles, you probably won't agree to 3 bottles. 2 bottles of 100-flower wine. How about that?" When Guanair heard this, he glared at Zhang San and said, "Ida, don't be silly. Ida, don't mess around. If the Lord gets angry, you won't be able to bear the consequences." "I'm just joking. My Lord won't really be angry. I'm just trying to liven up the atmosphere and improve our relationship." Zhang San's face stiffened when he heard this, after which he carefully glanced at the reincarnation Immortal City above his head, after which he coughed a few times and straightened his expression. At this moment, Zhao Yunzheng glanced at Zhang San, then raised a finger and said, "1 bottle. Haha, I knew that Yunzhengji would speak. How about it, Huang Su, I won, right? 3 bottles of 100 flowers wine. Don't go back on your word." Zhang San laughed and looked at Huang Su. When Zhao Yun heard this, his face froze. Guanair, Dian Xiong, Gao Shun, Zhang Liao, and the other generals were all stunned. As for Huang Sheng, he slapped the back of Huang Su's head without hesitation. In the next second, all of the generals burst into laughter. Reincarnation Immortal City, the city lord's residence. Yi Qin's mouth twitched when he saw his subordinates fooling around. Although Zhang Sin no longer had the weakness of scolding and beating his subordinates, not only did his love for wine not change, but he had become even stronger. "That's good. I won't get drunk from 100 flowers wine. Drinking more can satisfy my craving and increase my cultivation." Thinking of this, Yi Qin couldn't help but smile. At this moment, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire led a group of nobles up the city wall. When Zoros saw the endless player army and the countless poor people outside the city, his eyes lit up. There really are so many of them. If I knew this would happen, I would have gathered these players and fought against Prince Yu of Han's armed forces. When Prince Zoros finished speaking, a general of the Polar Bear Empire nodded affirmatively and said, "That's right. That's right. With these mutants here, there's no need for us to make a move at all. They can still defeat the Ghost King of the Great Han Dynasty." When a civil official of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he glanced at the endless sea of people outside the city, then looked at Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire and said, "Your Highness, I think that we should add an official position in the Polar Bear Empire to record the population. Otherwise, if we encounter such a situation in the future, we'll be flustered again." Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire laughed and said, "You're right. In the future, we should learn from the Great Han and make a household register for everyone. That way, we'll know how many people there are in the Polar Bear Empire." A civil official hesitated for a moment before asking, "Your Highness, a portion of these players were expelled from the capital. The rest can only be teleported out of the capital. If they have resentment in their hearts and are unwilling to listen to our orders to resist the armed forces of the Great Han, what should we do?" Prince Zoros' eyes widened when he heard this. Then he shouted sternly, "Rebel against them. If they dare to disobey, then they'll be labeled as sinners." While the prince and the other nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were discussing this matter, the players of the Polar Bear Empire didn't hesitate to raise their middle fingers at Prince Zoros and the other nobles of the Polar Bear Empire. Seeing this, Prince Zoros paused for a moment before looking at the surrounding nobles and asking. He looked at the other nobles and asked, "What do these players' gestures mean?" "I don't know. Perhaps it's admiration. It's probably admiration at the location of the Polar Bear Empire's army." After a noisy discussion, the Polar Bear Empire's players closest to the Reincarnation Immortal City's army took out their bows and arrows and aimed at the Reincarnation Immortal City's army. Whoosh, 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 dense sounds of arrows piercing through the air could be heard. Then, tens of millions of arrows soared into the sky and shot towards the Reincarnation Immortal City's army. At the location of the Reincarnation Immortal City's army, Zhao Yunzheng, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Gao Shun, Huang Sheng, and the others looked at the distorted space behind them. After confirming that all of their subordinates had arrived, they exchanged glances with each other and shouted in unison, "Boss! Green Dragon Battle Formation! Kill! Kill! Kill!" The 2,410,000 Reincarnation Immortal City's army roared loudly, and their voices shook the sky. In the next second, green light rose from the Reincarnation Immortal City's guards and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the green light gathered in one spot. Roar! A dragon's roar shook the heavens and earth. Then, a gigantic green dragon covered in green scales appeared in the sky. The Polar Bear Empire's players, who had just attacked the Reincarnation Immortal City's army, were stunned. "What's that? Dragon? The Eastern Godly Dragon? How can this be? How can they summon a mythical creature?" Roar! The dragon's roar could be heard again. Then, the gigantic green dragon landed on the ground and enveloped the Reincarnation Immortal City's army and the generals. In the next second, the green dragon soared into the sky and turned into a stream of light that charged towards the Polar Bear Empire's army. Chapter 953. On the walls of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city. What? What is that? Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire's excited face froze, and he shouted in shock. That seems to be the totem of the Great Han Empire, the Dragon God. A Polar Bear Empire's general said in a daze. "Isn't the Dragon God golden? That's green," a civil official of the Polar Bear Empire said, with a dumbfounded expression. "Damn it, that's not important. What's important is that it's a dragon. It's not something that we mortals can fight against." Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire roared with a pale face. At the location of the Polar Bear Empire's army, the Eastern Dragon God turned into light. It's charging over. There are arrows. We'll block it, will it? It should be. Just as the Polar Bear Empire's players were shocked by the Azure Dragon's attack, the Azure Dragon turned into a green light and streaked across the sky, blocking out the tens of millions of arrows. In an instant, the tens of millions of arrows turned into dust. On the walls of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire's pupils constricted when he saw the green light turn tens of millions of arrows into points. He then shouted anxiously. It turned tens of millions of arrows into points in an instant. Prince Zoros, why don't we continue the marriage alliance? When a civil official saw this, he heavily swallowed his saliva with a gudong sound, and then opened his mouth to speak. Quick, get people to bring all the daughters you've chosen to the city walls. Quick! Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire immediately snapped out of his daze and shouted. The moment Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire finished speaking, the nobles on the city walls looked at their subordinates and shouted, "Go! Quick, bring the young ladies here." At the location of the Polar Bear Empire's army. "Run! Run!" A player from the Polar Bear Empire shouted, his pupils constricting when he saw the tens of millions of arrows being destroyed in the blink of an eye. However, at this moment, the green light landed on the ground and flashed past the players of the Polar Bear Empire. In that instant, the hundreds of millions of players from the Polar Bear Empire stiffened. Then, their bodies rapidly shrank, and in just a breath's time, they were reduced to dry corpses. A gentle breeze blew past, and the hundreds of millions of corpses were reduced to dust that scattered with the wind. The chilling scene appeared before the eyes of all the nobles, guards, paupers, and players of the Polar Bear Empire. At this moment, the entire battlefield fell silent. Gulp, gulp. The sound of gulping filled with fear soon rang out in waves. Everyone stared in horror at the hundreds of millions of dried corpses that were turning into dust in the wind. On the walls of the Polar Bear Empire, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire recovered from his shock and shuddered. He then said with a terrified expression, Hundreds of millions died, and they all turned into dried corpses too. Too terrifying. That's the Great Han Divine Dragon. It killed hundreds of millions of people. A general said in a trembling voice as he looked at the hundreds of millions of Polar Bear Empire's players being reduced to dust. Prince Zoros, your daughter, give her to Lord Yiyu of Gojoseon, a civil official said stiffly as he turned his head to look at Prince Zoros. When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he nodded in a daze. Ow. Okay. At the location of the Polar Bear Empire's army. Damn it. Can someone tell me? Yi Qin's armed forces, how can they summon such a terrifying Eastern Divine Dragon? I don't know. I only want to know one thing. Will the Divine Dragon summoned by Yi Qin's subordinates continue to attack? If the Eastern Divine Dragon continues to attack, we won't be able to escape. After we die, we'll still come online, damn it. If that's the case, won't we be killed until we're level 0? Damn the game's restrictions. Why can't we go offline during the World War? Why don't we surrender and submit to Yiyu of Gojoseon? Maybe we can live. Will he accept it? His army will kill anyone they see. They won't leave anyone alive. I think so. In the Polar Bear Empire, where hundreds of millions of people lived. Oh my God, who can save me? Sob, I don't want to die. This is God's punishment for the Polar Bear Empire. It must be those damn nobles. They've done too many evil things. That's why God sent the Great Han's divine weapon to punish the Polar Bear Empire. What punishment? They're invading. This is war. Damn it, they won't even let the poor off. How can it be a divine weapon? Look, the Eastern Divine Dragon has appeared again. Swoosh. The natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire raised their heads and looked at the huge Azure Dragon that had just appeared from the void. Don't attack. Please don't attack. The natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire were all looking forward to it. The terrifying scene of the Azure Dragon's attack was too shocking. Everyone was afraid and terrified. Even the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire who weren't afraid of death were the same. It was because of this that the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire had the same thought when they saw the Azure Dragon appear again. Roar. After a dragon roar that shook the heavens and earth, the huge Azure Dragon that was floating in the sky suddenly opened its mouth. At this moment, a gray ball that was almost solid instantly appeared in the Azure Dragon's mouth. Seeing this, the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire couldn't help but feel their hearts tighten. In the next second, cries of terror rang out. It's going to attack again. No, no, I don't want to die. I surrender. I surrender. Don't kill me. Sob. While the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire were crying and begging for mercy, the huge azure dragon in the sky instantly spat out the gray ball from its mouth. Boom! The air exploded and the clouds churned. The gray ball that the huge azure dragon spat out was only about 100 meters in diameter. However, none of the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire on the ground thought that the gray ball was ordinary. Chapter 954. The players of the Polar Bear Empire were in an uproar when they saw the gray ball hurtling toward the ground. Run! Run! The horrifying scene of the Azure Dragon killing hundreds of millions of players was still replaying in the minds of the natives and players of the Polar Bear Empire. Therefore, no one thought that the gray ball spat out by the Azure Dragon in the sky would be simple. That was the reason why the players of the Polar Bear Empire were so terrified. After waves of screams, the army of Polar Bear Empire's players fell into chaos. They pushed each other and tried to escape in a frenzy. However, there were more than 1 billion natives and players outside the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. There was nowhere for the players to run. If there was a place, it would be the area cleared by the Azure Dragon. However, no one dared to go there. No one dared to go there. In an instant, waves of Polar Bear Empire's players were pushed to the ground and trampled to death. The chaos lasted for less than 3 seconds. The gray ball, with a diameter of 100 meters, descended upon the army of Polar Bear Empire's players. Boom! After an explosion that shook the world, the gray ball suddenly exploded, after which it turned into a gray gas that filled the sky and surged in all directions. The gray gas came from the Azure Dragon Battle Formation skill, Cycle of Life and Death. It was the energy of death that the reincarnation Immortal City converted from the life energy of hundreds of millions of Polar Bear Empire's players. With the appearance of the gray gas, all the Polar Bear Empire's players who came into contact with the gray gas instantly withered and turned into dried corpses. The players of the Polar Bear Empire were even more terrified when they saw this. They pushed the people in front of them in a frenzy, trying to escape as far away as possible from the gray gas that was filled with the aura of death. However, there were too many people. No matter how hard they tried, it was useless. On the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire, seeing the mutant players of the Polar Bear Empire being turned into dried corpses by the gray gas, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire couldn't help but shudder. Then he screamed. This again, Prince Zoros, should we go down first? It's too dangerous on the city wall. A civil official looked fearfully at the Polar Bear Empire's players who were being turned into dried corpses by the gray gas. He then looked at Prince Zoros and asked. Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire immediately regained his senses and nodded. Yes, let's leave this place first. Prince Zoros, it's useless even if we leave. Divine Dragon can fly. Why don't we stay here? It's better to show our sincerity. When the Polar Bear Empire's senior guard Robes heard this, he immediately pulled back Prince Zoros, who was about to leave the city wall, and said seriously. When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, his face turned pale, and he shouted sternly, Robes, could it be that you want to harm me just because I canceled the marriage between your son and my daughter? Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire shook his head and said seriously, Prince Zoros, I didn't mean that. Prince Zoros, that's not what I meant. The dragon summoned by King Yu the Great could easily destroy the capital of the Polar Bear Empire, but it didn't do so. Instead, it attacked the mutants outside the city. This means that King Yu the Great doesn't want to destroy the Polar Bear Empire directly. Otherwise, we would all be dead now. Senior Guard Robes' words make a lot of sense. A civil official was stunned for a moment before his eyes lit up as he spoke. That should be the case. The divine dragon summoned by Prince Yu of Han could easily destroy the Polar Bear Empire's capital, but he didn't do so. He's probably waiting for us to surrender and offer him benefits. A general of the Polar Bear Empire pondered for a moment, then said excitedly after hearing this. As soon as the general finished speaking, the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief. Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire was stunned for a moment before revealing an excited expression. That's right. That must be it. Otherwise, we would probably all be killed by the divine dragon. Speaking to there, Prince Zoros let out a long sigh, then looked at the attendant beside him and shouted, "What are you doing? Go to the palace and find His Majesty. Bring me all the national treasures in the palace's secret vault. They must be precious and unique." "Yes, Your Highness." When Zoro's follower heard this, he hurriedly bowed. After he finished speaking, he hurriedly ran down the city wall and rushed towards the palace. Reincarnation Immortal City, City Lord's Mansion. Yi Chun released his divine sense and covered the entire battlefield. He glanced in the direction of the Polar Bear Empire's capital and curled his lips in disdain. These nobles of the Polar Bear Empire are really full of energy. I'm here to destroy the country and steal the providence of heaven and earth. If I don't kill the players a few times, they'll take back the Polar Bear Empire after I'm gone. How am I going to obtain the providence of the Polar Bear Empire then? There was a restriction that even Yi Chun couldn't ignore when destroying a country and snatching the providence of all countries other than the Great Han Empire. That was to say, he couldn't allow the players of the destroyed country to take back the territory of their country. Otherwise, even if Yi Chun snatched the providence of heaven and earth now, the providence would automatically disappear after the players of the destroyed country took back the territory of their country. It was also because of this reason that Yi Chun would kill all the players of the country at least once, regardless of whether it was destroying Zhebian or Tintu. This way, the strength of the players of Zhebian and Tintu would be greatly reduced, and they would become the training targets of the Eastern players. Then, they would be killed until their strength was 0, and they would finally die in the cruel real world. Of course, this was also why Yi Chun was willing to let the Eastern players follow him and pick up the equipment and techniques behind him. At the location of the Polar Bear Empire's army, the gray gas that enveloped the 60 million Polar Bear Empire's players gradually disappeared, revealing the dried corpses and statues inside. Looking around, the ground was covered with dried corpses. When the wind blew, dust flew everywhere. Then, the Polar Bear Empire's players turned into dust from head to toe, and then into dust again and again before being blown away by the wind. The chilling and soul-shaking scene played out again. Seeing this scene, the Polar Bear Empire's players panicked even more. Roar! The earth-shaking dragon roar sounded again. Then the 30,000-foot-long azure dragon waved its tail and instantly turned into a beam of azure light, disappearing in a flash. Chapter 955. On the ground, where the Polar Bear Army was. The hearts of the Polar Bear Empire's players throbbed violently when they saw the azure dragon swooping down and transforming into a beam of azure light. "I surrender. I surrender. Don't kill me." A middle-aged man knelt on the ground with a bang and then shouted with a face full of fear. The Polar Bear Empire's players knelt on the ground and kowtowed as they begged for mercy. On the Polar Bear Empire's city wall, Prince Zoros wiped the cold sweat off his forehead as he watched the inhumans of the Polar Bear Empire kowtow and beg for mercy. Then, he looked at his subordinate and asked, "What's the matter?" He looked at his attendant and asked, "Are the princesses and misses not here yet?" "Your Highness, the princesses and ladies should be arriving soon." The attendant hurriedly replied upon hearing Zoros' question. Prince Zoros clenched his fists tightly and said, "Go. Tell them that if they don't come here soon, they don't have to. Go to the guillotine. It's more suitable for them there." "Yes, Your Highness." When the attendant heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he hurriedly bowed and said, after he finished speaking, he hurriedly left the city wall. "Your Highness, there's no need to be in such a hurry. Prince Yu of Han probably won't attack us. He's just displaying his power to make us willingly submit to the Great Han." A civil official of the Polar Bear Empire glanced at Prince Zoro's entourage and hurriedly said, A polar bear empire's general with 2 scars on his face shook his head and said, "We should submit to the Great Han. He should be submitting to the Great Han King Yu, not submitting to the Great Han King. Don't forget that the Great Han King Yu has such battle prowess. How could he be afraid of some Great Han Emperor? Therefore, I feel that the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire, Asali, should be married to King Yu of the Great Han Dynasty, not the Emperor of the Great Han Dynasty." "You mean?" Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire was stunned when he heard this. He continued, "Call back the people we sent to the Great Han Empire?" The Polar Bear Empire's general with 2 scars on his face shook his head and said, "No, no. Prince Zoros, my opinion is that we should marry the Great Han Empire. This is a national matter. If the Polar Bear Empire wants to survive this disaster, we must marry the Great Han Empire. However, the princess doesn't have to be Ashali. We can choose a maid and make her the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire. As for the real first princess, Ashali, she should be given to Prince Yu of Han. This is the only way to show the sincerity of the Polar Bear Empire. I'm sure that Prince Yu of Han will be happy after hearing this. Could it be that you're not worried that after Ashali becomes King Yu of the Great Han's woman, she'll beg King Yu of the Great Han to seize the throne of our Polar Bear Empire?" Hearing this, Prince Zoros frowned and asked. The Polar Bear general with 2 scars on his face shook his head and said, "Prince Zoros, the Great Han Empire is the Great Han Empire. Prince Zoros, the Great Han Empire is the same as our Polar Bear Empire. We don't like women interfering in politics, and we won't let women ride on our heads. Therefore, Ashali will only become part of Prince Yu of Han's collection. She won't affect the Polar Bear Empire. Moreover, as long as we sincerely submit, Prince Yu of Han won't be able to destroy the Polar Bear Empire." "Okay, let's do that." Prince Zoros was silent for a moment before he nodded heavily. He then looked at the senior guard Robes and said, "Robes, go to the Great Han Empire. Robbins, go to the palace and bring Ashali here. Remember, you have to be quick." "Okay." The senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire, Robes, nodded and left the city wall. Outside the Polar Bear Empire's capital, where the Polar Bear Empire's army was located. When a green light flashed, hundreds of millions of Polar Bear Empire's players who were begging for mercy were instantly turned into dried corpses and blown into dust. In the next second, the Azure Dragon's body was revealed and spat out a gray ball. In just a few breaths' time, tens of millions of players were killed. At this moment, the Polar Bear Empire's players completely collapsed. "Damn it. Yichen won't accept our surrender. Fight it out with them." "How?" "They're all inside the Eastern Dragon God's body. We can't reach them. On the other hand, hundreds of millions of our players are killed. If this happens a few more times, we'll all die. Goddamn Yichun, that perverted, murderous demon." The Polar Bear Empire's players screamed crazily as they fled. Meanwhile, the poor natives of the Polar Bear Empire who had yet to be attacked started running in all directions. In the sky, the Azure Dragon formed by the Reincarnation Immortal City's army glanced at the ground and dove down again. Then, it turned into a green light and disappeared in a flash. This time, the players weren't the only ones who were attacked. The poor natives who weren't attacked were also attacked. When the Azure Dragon appeared in the sky again, the Polar Bear Empire's players and natives who had fled a few hundred meters away were turned into dried corpses and scattered with the wind. This is going to kill us all. This must be it. No, I don't want to die. Run, continue to run. We can definitely escape. Get out of my way. Don't block my way. Just as the Polar Bear Empire's players and natives were shouting, the Eastern Dragon God's army arrived from afar. Looking at the Azure Dragon in the sky and the chaotic Polar Bear Empire's army, the Eastern Dragon God's players were stunned at first. Then they burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha, we finally made it. Holy sh*t. The number of players and natives in the Polar Bear Empire doesn't seem to be much less than 10-2. Isn't this great? When Yiyu of Gojoseon destroys the Polar Bear Empire, we can farm more monsters. Don't you think it's too inhumane for us to farm monsters like this? Damn it. If you feel that way, get out of here as soon as possible. Damn it. Why don't you think about what will happen to us if the Eastern Dragon God attacks us? This is the benefit that Yu of Gojosian gave us. If you don't want it, get out of here, you idiot. Don't be an eyesore here. That's right. Yu of Gojosian didn't kill the Eastern Dragon God's players. Who cares if they live or die? Besides, which of these countries hasn't invaded the East before? We're taking revenge now. He doesn't understand the big picture. To put it simply, with Yu of Gojosian, our strength is rising rapidly. Moreover, we've obtained a lot of good equipment and skills. With these, we'll be safer in the real world. That's the F*King truth. Just as the Eastern players were discussing, the Azure Dragon launched a few more attacks, clearing out the Polar Bear Empire players on the battlefield. As for the natives of the Polar Bear Empire, a large number of them were wiped out. At this moment, there were only desperate cries and dull sobs left on the battlefield. They wanted to escape, but they couldn't. They wanted to live, but they couldn't. Chapter 956. As the wind blew, the dried corpses turned into dust and scattered with the wind. The aura of death grew stronger and stronger. Cries of fear and despair filled the entire battlefield. On the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire couldn't help but wipe the cold sweat on his forehead when he saw that half of the battlefield had been cleared in just a few minutes. The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire, standing around Prince Zoros, weren't any better. They felt that Yi Chen's army wouldn't destroy the Polar Bear Empire, but even so, they were still afraid. They had no choice. The Azure Dragon summoned by the reincarnation Immortal City's army was too terrifying. It killed hundreds of millions of people with one strike, and all of them died miserably. It was impossible for them to remain calm. Ashali, my daughter, and the other ladies haven't arrived yet? Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire glanced at the Azure Dragon that swooped down mercilessly again and then looked at the ramp that led up to the city wall. A civil official of the Polar Bear Empire shook his head when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, dense footsteps could be heard coming from a slope. They're here. A general of the Polar Bear Empire's eyes lit up when he heard the dense footsteps. He then shouted in surprise. Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire let out a long sigh and then said, "It's good that they're here. It's good that they're here." As soon as Prince Zoros finished speaking, a 5-year-old girl wearing a white tutu dress led a group of Polar Bear Empire beauties, who were also wearing luxurious tutu dresses, onto the city wall. When the guards on the city wall saw this, they all stood to the sides and bowed to the beautiful girls who had climbed up the city wall. The Polar Bear Empire's guards saluted sincerely because they knew that if the Polar Bear Empire wanted to survive, they could only rely on these beautiful girls. Along the way, the girls attracted more and more attention. They only stopped when they arrived in front of Prince Zoros. "Greetings, Uncle Zoros." After the 5-year-old girl glanced at Prince Zoros, she immediately gave him a very solemn, noble salute. When Prince Zoros heard this, he glanced at Ashali and forced a smile. "Ashali, I'm sorry. Wronged? Uncle Wong, do you think Ashali has been wronged?" Ashali glanced at Prince Zoros and asked. When Prince Zoros heard this, his face sank, and he said in a deep voice, "Ashali, you are the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire. You must put the safety of the Polar Bear Empire first. Your father, your mother, and the millions of people who love you are here. Uncle Wong, there's no need to tell Ashali these things. Ashali knows what to do," Ashali said calmly. Then she looked outside the city. At this moment, due to the Azure Dragon's attack, hundreds of millions of Polar Bear Empire's natives had been turned into dried corpses. Then they were reduced to fine powder in the wind and scattered with the wind. When Prince Zoros saw this, his face sank again. He glared at Ashali's back and then looked at the senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire, Robies, and said, "What's the matter? Robies, is there any way to tell King Yu of the Great Han that we want to negotiate?" When the senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, Robies glanced at the huge, floating island above the battlefield and said, "Prince Zoros, you should be on the island above the battlefield." Prince Zoros, King Yu of the Great Han, should be on the island in the sky. We can't contact King Yu of the Great Han through normal means, so we can only shout. This way, even if King Yu of the Great Han can't hear us, his army can. As long as King Yu of the Great Han's army hears us, they will definitely stop attacking and inform King Yu of the Great Han. When Prince Zoros heard this, he nodded and said, "Okay, then since I'm going to shout, try to shout as loudly as possible." When the senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire, Robies, heard this, he nodded and then looked at the guards around him and shouted, "Shout! Esteemed Prince Yu of Han, the Polar Bear Empire has already submitted a letter of credence to the Great Han Empire. They are willing to submit to the Great Han Empire and marry the Emperor of the Great Han Empire. In addition, the Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire is willing to marry the princess to Lord Yu of Beach." Yes, Senior Guard. When the Polar Bear Empire guards on the city walls heard this, they hurriedly bowed and replied. In the next second, the guards on the city walls of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city looked at the azure dragon in the sky and shouted, "Esteemed Prince Yu of Han, the Polar Bear Empire has already submitted a letter of credence to the Great Han Empire. They are willing to submit to the Great Han Empire and marry the Emperor of the Great Han Empire. The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire is willing to marry the princess to Lord Yu of Beach." Their voices were extremely loud and resounding, and they instantly spread to the battlefield outside the city. When the natives of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, they were all stunned. Then they all revealed excited expressions. "Well, great, we don't have to die anymore. Yes, our Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire has already submitted. The divine dragon of the Great Han Empire won't attack us anymore. Those damn nobles. Why didn't they say this from start? If they had said this from the start, our Polar Bear Empire wouldn't have lost so many people. When we're safe, we'll find those damn nobles and settle the score. If it weren't for them, our Polar Bear Empire wouldn't have lost so many people. Shouldn't we be looking for the Great Han Empire? The one who killed our Polar Bear Empire citizens is the divine dragon of the Great Han Empire. Look for the Great Han Empire." "You bastard, you're courting death. Don't drag us down with you. Beat this bastard to death. Let him talk." Just as the natives of the Polar Bear Empire were shouting one after another, the azure dragon in the sky swooped down again. Then it turned into a stream of light and disappeared in a flash. Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, Huang Sheng, and the other generals, as well as all the guards of the Reincarnation Immortal City, heard the shouts of the Polar Bear Empire's guards. But so what? Whether it was Zhao Yun, Dian Xiong, Guan Er, Zhang San, the other generals, or all the guards of the Reincarnation Immortal City, they only knew that their lord, Yi Chun, had given the order. Annihilation of cities, annihilation of cities, annihilation of towns, annihilation of villages, annihilation of all, not leaving a single one. On the ground, the natives of the Polar Bear Empire were stunned when they saw the azure dragon swooping down again. They were about to attack again. Then all of them widened their eyes. Why are they attacking us? Our Polar Bear Empire has already submitted. Chapter 9:57. No, don't come down. We've surrendered. We've really surrendered. No, I don't want to die. Sob, sob, sob. Damn it, it's all that idiot's fault. He said he would cause trouble for the Great Han Empire. Look, the Great Han Empire's dragon is enraged. Kill him. Kill him quickly. Otherwise, the Great Han Empire's dragon won't stop. Chaotic and noisy shouts came from the natives of the Polar Bear Empire, and the nobles on the city walls of the Polar Bear Empire shuddered all of a sudden. Shout with all your might. Shout at the top of your lungs. Prince Zoros's face turned pale when he saw the azure dragon attack again. He then looked at the Polar Bear Empire guards on the city walls and shouted. At this moment, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire was very worried that the cries of the guards had not been heard by the enormous green dragon in the sky. If that happened, all his preparations and plans would fail completely. Then, the Polar Bear Empire's council would be destroyed, and he would be killed. This wasn't the result he wanted to see. Because of this, Prince Zoro's face was filled with nervousness and fear. The moment Prince Zoro's finished speaking, the polar bear Empire guards on the city walls shouted again. Honorable Prince Yu of Han, the Polar Bear Empire has submitted a letter of credence to the Great Han Empire and is willing to submit to the Great Han Empire. The Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire is willing to marry his princess to Yu of Beach. Shouts were heard over and over again on the battlefield. However, the Azure Dragon showed no signs of stopping as it swooped down. In the next second, the Azure Dragon flashed, and hundreds of millions of natives of the Polar Bear Empire were instantly turned into dried corpses. Then, they turned into dust and scattered with the wind. Reincarnation Immortal City, City Lord's Mansion. Yi Chen's divine sense covered the entire battlefield. He glanced at the Polar Bear Empire's city walls and sneered. You want me to stop by relying on the marriage and marrying a woman? You're dreaming. If I stop, how am I going to obtain the providence of heaven and earth? However, the little princess of the Polar Bear Empire, Ashali, seems a little abnormal. No matter how much education a 5-year-old girl received, it was impossible for her to behave like an adult. Thinking up to this point, Yi Chun looked straight at the Polar Bear Empire's little princess, Ashali, who was calmly watching the battlefield from above the city wall. A few seconds later, Yi Chun couldn't help but frown. He released his divine sense and probed Ashali. In the next second, Yi Chun's eyes widened. I was wondering why Ashali was acting so strange. It turned out that the soul of a bear was controlling her body. Reincarnation, with a human body and a bear soul, it could be possession or reincarnation. The former had memories, but they would not be assimilated by humans. As for the latter, although they retained their memories, there was a high chance that they would be assimilated by humans. To be more precise, he possessed all the emotions of a human being. The little princess of the Polar Bear Empire, Ashali, was in the state of being assimilated by humans. If that wasn't the case, Ashali wouldn't have agreed to the Polar Bear Empire's Prince Zoro's decision to marry Yi Chun. This Ashali must have compromised in order to protect the Emperor and Empress of the Polar Bear Empire. At the same time, she didn't want the Emperor and Empress of the Polar Bear Empire to discover her true identity. What an interesting bear. Unfortunately, the Polar Bear Empire will be destroyed. No matter who it is, they will all die. Thinking up to this point, Yi Chen's gaze instantly turned cold. Outside the capital of the Polar Bear Empire, the natives of the Polar Bear Empire were still crying and wailing. What was different from before was that the natives of the Polar Bear Empire were desperately trying to explain that the Polar Bear Empire had already surrendered. Unfortunately, what greeted them was the merciless attack of the Azure Dragon. Again and again, the Azure Dragon fell to the ground. Again and again, the Azure Dragon wiped out batch after batch of natives of the Polar Bear Empire. After the Azure Dragon massacred the natives of the Polar Bear Empire, the players who had died before were revived on the battlefield in batches. They could have revived directly, but none of them dared to do so. Because they would die if they revived, their souls stayed in the revival space and refused to revive. Unfortunately, no matter how unwilling they were or how much they didn't want to, they were automatically revived on the battlefield once the maximum resurrection time was up. At the location of the Eastern Players' Army, seeing that the gamers of the Polar Bear Empire were reviving in droves, the Eastern gamers were excited. Damn, these natives of the Polar Bear Empire have been killed by Yi Yu of Gojoseon subordinates. It's our turn to attack. Hee, don't be anxious. It's still dangerous for us to attack now. Let's wait for Yi Yu of Gojoseon subordinates to kill them 1 or 2 more times. You beast! You're so treacherous. Damn, you don't seem to think so. I'm just kidding. Say, did you guys hear any shouts? Damn. The Polar Bear Empire is surrendering and submitting to the Great Han Dynasty. They even want to marry their princess to Yi Yu of Gojoseon. Damn, it can't be. Doesn't that mean we can't kill them? Calm down. Why don't you think about it? Japan and Tinto also shouted for surrender. But our King Yu of Yi didn't even care. That's true. According to Yi Yu of Gojoseon's murderous nature, the Polar Bear Empire will be destroyed. While the Eastern players were shouting, The players of the Polar Bear Empire who had just revived heard the shouts of the Polar Bear Empire's guards. Motherf asterisk Kerr. Why didn't you surrender earlier? Why did you have to wait for me to die before surrendering? These Motherf asterisk King natives deserve to die. Once Chen retreats, we'll kill these players. Then, we'll take control of the Polar Bear Empire. That's what we'll do. Damn it, we'll be restricted by these F asterisk King natives. They even chased us out of the city. If I don't kill them, I won't be happy. Look, the Eastern Dragon God is attacking again. Following the exclamations, the azure dragon in the sky swooped down again and turned into a ray of green light. It pounced on the revived natives of the Polar Bear Empire. Damn it, we've already surrendered. Why are they still attacking us? Motherf asterisk Kerr, I knew it. That bastard Yi Chun didn't massacre a city on a whim. Motherf asterisk Kerr, he wants to destroy our Polar Bear Empire. F asterisk CK, I don't want to die again. Chapter 958. The players of the Polar Bear Empire roared in anger, but what greeted them was the merciless attack of the Azure Dragon. As soon as the green light passed, hundreds of millions of dried corpses appeared on the battlefield again, and the noise stopped abruptly. A gust of wind blew past, and the hundreds of millions of dried corpses immediately turned into fine powder that drifted away with the wind. A terrifying and shocking scene appeared on the battlefield once again. On the walls of the capital city of the Polar Bear Empire, Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire looked at the nobles around him with a pale face and asked, "What's the matter? That burly dragon god, did he hear our shouts? Should be able to hear it, right?" When a general of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he swallowed his saliva and said, "He definitely didn't hear it. That must be it. Otherwise, why wouldn't that dragon god stop attacking?" Hearing that, a civil official of the Polar Bear Empire came back to his senses from the panic and shouted firmly, "Yes, you definitely didn't hear it. Let the guards continue to shout. Shout as loud as you can. Whoever dares to not do his best, kill him." Yes, let's do it." While the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were discussing in a panic due to the endless attacks of the Azure Dragon, the children of the nobles on the city wall recovered from the terrifying scene outside the city and let out ear-piercing screams. They were told that they were going to marry Prince Yu of Han. They were also told that Prince Yu of Han was very powerful, so they had to wear the most beautiful clothes, with the most expensive jewelry, and show their most perfect side to Prince Yu of Han. However, when they reached the top of the city wall, what they saw was not Prince Yu of Han, but a shocking and terrifying scene that they had never seen before. Hundreds of millions of people were turned into dried corpses in the blink of an eye. Then, they turned into dust and scattered with the wind. This scene was so terrifying that it almost made them suffocate. They were so frightened that their eyes widened and their mouths gaped. They didn't dare to breathe or speak. Their eyes were lifeless, and it lasted for a long time. Now that they had regained their senses, they could no longer suppress the fear in their hearts. Thus, they began to scream, unbridled screams. "All of you shut up." Prince Zoros, who was already annoyed, flew into a rage when he heard this. He pulled out the sword at his waist and stabbed a noble's daughter to death. Prince Zoros' rage instantly caused the screaming daughters of the nobles to widen their eyes. Their faces were filled with fear as they looked at their fathers for help. "Angel, calm down. You must be calm. Show me your most beautiful side. Don't disappoint me." A general of the Polar Bear Empire shouted without hesitation after seeing his daughter's gaze. A civil official of the Polar Bear Empire looked at his daughter and said seriously, "Don't worry. Angelina, don't be afraid. Do you see that island outside the city? That's Prince Yu of Han's island. After you marry Prince Yu of Han, you can live there. Isn't that the life you've always dreamed of? So, cheer up and don't mess up your makeup." One after another, the nobles comforted their daughters, but all of them wanted their daughters to continue standing on the city wall and put on their most beautiful appearance. Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heaved a long sigh after hearing the words of the nobles. Then, He held his blood-stained sword and looked at his daughter with a solemn expression. "Alyssa, don't disappoint me." "Yes, yes, father." Zoro's daughter, Alyssa, tried her best to calm her wildly beating heart when she heard this. The expressionless first princess of the Polar Bear Empire, Ashali, stood at the edge of the city wall. She glanced at the people around her and then looked at the huge island floating in the sky in the distance again. "I'm Ashali, the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire. I want to talk to you." Ashali's voice wasn't loud, but it was very penetrating. It instantly passed through the battlefield and reached Yi Qin's ears in Reincarnation Immortal City. Soul voice. Thinking about this, Yi Qin couldn't help but frown. Then, he looked at Ashali, who was on the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire. She should be a special character of the Polar Bear Empire, just like Zhuxiai and Yu Xian in the Three Kingdoms Novice region. However, she didn't have her own body, but her soul power was comparable to a mortal evolution state cultivator. Even so, she shouldn't be able to use soul voice. Soul voice was a soul spell. Although it didn't have any offensive power, it wasn't something a mortal evolution state could use, even if one was proficient in soul power. She probably had some treasure on her that could strengthen her soul power. When he thought of this, Yi Qin took a step forward and disappeared. Outside the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire, the space suddenly distorted. Then, a young man stepped out and appeared here. The guards of the Polar Bear Empire, who were shouting the words of the high-ranking guard, Robbies, were dazed and stopped shouting. They couldn't help but be dazed because the young man who suddenly appeared outside the city wall was standing in the air without any support. The young man was none other than Yi Qin, Yu of Beach of the Great Han Empire. After being stunned for a short while, Prince Zoro shuddered. He looked at Yi Qin and carefully asked, "What do you think? May I ask who you are?" "Uncle King, didn't you want to see King Yu of the Great Han?" "He is King Yu of the Great Han." When Ashali heard Prince Zoro's, she didn't even turn her head. As soon as Ashali's words fell, the nobles and Prince Zoro's on the city wall were dazed. They knew that Yi Qin was very powerful. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a powerful army and wouldn't be able to summon the Great Han Empire's dragon god. But no matter how much they thought about it, they never thought that Yu of Beach of the Great Han Empire, Yi Qin, could actually fly. Such an existence could only be achieved by a god. After recovering from their shock, Prince Zoro's and the nobles around him hastily bowed to Yi Qin and loudly greeted him. "Greetings, Sir Yu of Beach." "Greetings, Sir Yu of Beach." The daughters of the nobles on the city wall all hurriedly followed suit. Hearing this, Yi Qin glanced at the Polar Bear Empire's dignitaries and their daughters, then looked straight at Ashali and said, "What do you want to talk about?" Ashali had a treasure that could strengthen her soul power. Although it wasn't enough for her to use large-scale soul spells for a long time, it could still be used once. If Ashali had done that before, one or two of Yi Qin's subordinates would have definitely died. As for the reason, it was very simple. Yi Qin's subordinates simply didn't have the ability to resist soul spells. As for how powerful soul spells were, Yi Qin, who had been reborn, was well aware of that. Naturally, Yi Qin wasn't afraid of this now, but Yi Qin's subordinates weren't. It was precisely because Ashali didn't directly attack Yi Qin's subordinates that Yi Qin came over to meet the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire, Ashali. As for how to deal with Ashali, Yi Qin would have to depend on the situation. But regardless of the situation, Yi Qin wouldn't agree to let the Polar Bear Empire off. After all, the goal of Yi Qin's expedition was to destroy a nation and snatch the luck of the world. Chapter 959. When the first princess of the Polar Bear Empire heard Yi Qin's question, she glanced at Yi Qin and said, "I'm willing to submit to you. I am willing to submit to you, but you have to let the Polar Bear Empire go." As soon as Asali said this, the Polar Bear Empire's Prince Zealous expression changed. In Prince Zealous' view, Asali's words were completely provoking Yi Qin. Damn, they'd already thought it through. They wanted to marry Asali and all the beautiful daughters of the Polar Bear Empire's nobles to Yi Qin and use them to exchange for the safety of the Polar Bear Empire. Ashali, on the other hand, actually said that she would submit to Yi Chun. She even used this as a condition to make Yi Chun, the king of Han, let go of the Polar Bear Empire. Wasn't this a clear threat to Yi Chun? Wasn't Yi Chun threatening him? It would be fine if Yi Chun accepted it, but if he didn't and got angry, then their plan would be completely ruined. The Polar Bear Empire would also be destroyed, and they, the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire, would no doubt end up dead. After a brief moment of panic, Prince Zealous looked at Asali with a serious expression and scolded in a low voice, "Princess Yu of Han." Asali. "Lord Yu of Beach, Princess Asali is young and doesn't know any better. Please don't take it to heart. The Polar Bear Empire is willing to submit to Great Han." "Oh, no. We are willing to submit to Lord Yu of Beach." A civil official of the Polar Bear Empire hurriedly looked at Yi Chun and bowed humbly. "Lord Yu of Beach, in order to express our sincerity, the beauties on the city wall will become Yu of Beach's concubines." A general of the Polar Bear Empire hurriedly added respectfully. "Lord Yu of Beach, we can guarantee that they are all virgins and have never held hands with another man." "That's right, Lord Yu of Beach. If you like, you could treat them as female slaves." The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were worried that Yi Chun would be angered by Ashley's words, so they kept trying to persuade and explain to Yi Chun. They were afraid that Yi Chun would kill them if he got angry. Yi Chun frowned when he heard the noises of the Polar Bear Empire's nobles. He raised his right hand and slapped the air. Boom! A violent explosion sounded in the air. Then, a violent airflow appeared out of thin air and pressed down on the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire on the city wall. Seeing this scene, the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were all stunned. They said this and that just so that Yi Chun wouldn't get angry. They didn't want Yi Chun to get angry. Who would have thought that Yu of Beach, Yi Chun of the Great Han Empire, didn't listen to them at all and even launched an attack? Although Yi Chun only slapped casually, the power of the explosion and the violent airflow couldn't be faked. The hearts of the dignitaries of the Polar Bear Empire skipped a beat. A milky white light barrier appeared out of nowhere. Then, it instantly blocked the berserk chi that Yi Chun sent out with his right hand. Seeing this scene, the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were stunned once again. Then, they burst into an uproar. What? What is this?" Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire said in a daze as he looked at the milky white light shield that suddenly appeared and enveloped the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. I don't know," a civil official of the Polar Bear Empire said in disbelief. Could be a miracle. Otherwise, how could it block Yu of Gojoseon's attack all of a sudden?" The senior guard of the Polar Bear Empire, Robbie's, suddenly thought of something. Then his eyes lit up and he said excitedly, Yes, it must be a miracle." Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he said excitedly. As soon as Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire finished speaking, a civil official of the Polar Bear Empire glanced at Yi Chun and then cupped his fists with a serious expression. "Yu of Beach, our Polar Bear Empire is sincere in wanting to negotiate. We hope that Yu of Beach will understand." When Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire heard this, he immediately recovered from his ecstasy and looked straight at Yi Chun. "Yu of Gojoseon, how about we negotiate?" "Yes, Yu of Gojoseon, our Polar Bear Empire has no enmity with the Great Han Empire. As long as you are willing to withdraw your troops, the princesses of our Polar Bear Empire and the direct daughters of the major families will still be given to Yu of Gojoseon." A general of the Polar Bear Empire nodded seriously and echoed, "That's right. As long as you of Beach withdraw your troops, everything will be negotiable. Not only beautiful women, but also a large number of precious treasures." The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were all excited by the sudden appearance of the miracle, but they didn't become arrogant because of it. However, their attitude toward Yi Chun wasn't as humble as before. When Yi Chun heard this, he glanced at the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire, then looked at Ashali on the city wall and said, "I came here to destroy this empire. I came here to destroy the Polar Bear Empire. There's no way I'll let it go." As soon as Yi Chun finished speaking, the expressions of the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire changed. Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire looked at Yi Chun with an ugly expression and asked, "Yi Yu of Gojoseon, our Polar Bear Empire is now under the protection of a god. Could it be that Yi Yu of Gojoseon wants to go against a god?" Originally, Prince Zoros thought that with the miracle, Yi Chun, this Prince Yu of Han, would be somewhat apprehensive. At the very least, he would lower his attitude toward the Polar Bear Empire and agree to negotiate and withdraw his troops. But in the end, Yi Chun didn't care about the miracle of the Polar Bear Empire, nor did he care about the fact that his attack was blocked by the miracle. He directly said that he wanted to destroy the Polar Bear Empire. This seriously exceeded the expectations of Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire. How could Prince Zoros remain calm? As soon as Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire finished speaking, the surrounding nobles immediately recovered from their shock and were in an uproar. "Yi Yu of Gojoseon, you have to think carefully. As long as you withdraw your troops, the god won't make things difficult for you. Otherwise, you will anger the god. Yes, Yi Yu of Gojoseon, you have to think carefully." The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire persuaded Yi Chun one after another. It was a noisy scene. Hearing this, Yi Chun's eyes flashed coldly. In the next second, Yi Chun waved his right hand, and a thick black godslayer appeared instantly. Then he stabbed at the shield of providence that enveloped the entire Polar Bear Empire. With a poof, the thick black godslayer instantly pierced through the milky white shield of providence. Seeing this, the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were all stunned. At this moment, with a crash, the miracle of the Polar Bear Empire instantly shattered and disappeared without a trace. Chapter 960. The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire were stunned when they saw Yi Chun shatter the miracle with a single stab. Then, they shuddered in unison. In the next second, the courage that the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire had just raised disappeared without trace. Then, they saw the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire uniformly kneeling on the ground. That was called sincerity. That was called humility. They had no choice but to do so. Yi Chun had given them too much of a shock. F***, that was a miracle. That was a miracle that had easily blocked Yi Chun's attack and given them great courage and confidence. Yet, it had been destroyed so crudely. There was nothing but a single stab. What did this mean? It meant that Yu of Beech, Yi Chun of the Great Han Empire, had power comparable to, or even surpassing that of gods. Otherwise, how could this happen? "Lord Yu of Beech, we submit. We submit." Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire shouted in a trembling voice. "Lord Yu of Beech, we submit. If you want to destroy our empire, then destroy it. We all submit." A civil official of the Polar Bear Empire shouted with a pale face. Hearing this, Yi Chun sneered and pointed at the air with his left hand. Kaboom! Deafening thunder instantly sounded. Then, hundreds of thousands of lightning bolts appeared out of nowhere and struck the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire, their daughters, and guards on the city wall. At this moment, the world lit up, and the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire turned into a forest of lightning. Boom! 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 After a series of explosions, everyone on the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire, except for Ash Ali, was blasted into pieces without exception. In the distance, where the Eastern Player army was located, when the Eastern players saw Yi Chun make a move, they were all dumbfounded. Then, with a gulp, they all gulped. Yi Yu of Gojoseon rarely makes a move when he goes out on expeditions. When he does, it's against powerful existences. Now that I suddenly see Yi Yu of Gojoseon attacking ordinary natives, I'm a little scared, yeah. But then again, as long as we don't become enemies with Yi Yu of Gojoseon, we don't have to worry about this. Yi Yu of Gojoseon won't kill people for no reason. Everyone knows this. That's true. The people that Yi Yu of Gojoseon killed were all looking for trouble with Yi Yu of Gojoseon. Although Yi Yu of Gojoseon killed many of them, they were looking for death. They can't blame Yi Yu of Gojoseon. Hee, don't be afraid. As long as you don't have any other thoughts, you don't have to worry about Yi Yu of Gojoseon killing you. It's that simple. Do you think that after Yi Yu of Gojoseon unifies the three kingdoms, the real world will be controlled by Yi Yu of Gojoseon? It's hard to say. Even if we, the independent players, are willing to see Yi Yu of Gojoseon unify the world, the leaders of the major factions might not be willing. Sai, let's not talk about this. It's useless to talk about it, because no one knows what Yi Yu of Gojoseon will do. Just as the Eastern players were discussing Yi Qin's annihilation of hundreds of thousands of Polar Bear Empire's natives, another batch of Polar Bear Empire's players who had just revived was stunned. Then, they burst into an uproar. Damn it! Is there any justice in this world? It's bad enough that Yi Qin's army is overpowered, but why is Yi Qin so overpowered as well? He can summon hundreds of thousands of lightning bolts just by raising his hand. Yi Qin has become a god. That must be it. Otherwise, he can't be so powerful. Damn it. Let's not talk about Yi Qin. Let's talk about us first. Even if we get killed, it won't be long before we revive again. Then, we'll be killed by that damned Eastern Dragon God and lose another 10 levels. If this goes on, we'll all return to level 0, and it won't be long. Damn it. If I knew what to do, I wouldn't have dragged this out until now. I can't run away, and I can't log off either. That's not important. Haven't you realized that Yi Qin came here to kill us until we're level 0 and destroy the Polar Bear Empire? He wants to kill all the Polar Bear Empire's players in the real world. Begging for mercy is useless. Yi Qin won't accept it at all. Damn it, where's God? Why isn't he coming to save us? Just as the Polar Bear Empire's players were venting their fear, the 10,000-foot-long azure dragon swooped down again. It turned into a streak of azure light and charged straight at the Polar Bear Empire's players who had just revived. In the next second, the Polaris Empire's players were all turned into dried corpses without exception. Then, they turned into dust and scattered with the wind. On the city walls of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city, Ashali glanced at the charred chunks of flesh that covered the city walls, then looked at Yi Qin and said, Yi Yu of Gojoseon, you know that I can use soul magic. Do you know that I can possess another body? And then, when Yi Qin heard this, he glanced at Ashali and asked, Yi Yu of Gojoseon, if I possess one of your wives, what will you do? Ashali said calmly as she stroked her long hair. Yi Qin's eyes widened when he heard this. A violent killing intent instantly surged out. Ashali, don't think that I'll be merciful and let you go just because I'm willing to come out and meet you. Yi Yu of Gojoseon, you're exaggerating. Ashali only wants to tell you one thing. Ashali can possess another person. Even if Ashali is killed by Yi Yu of Gojoseon, I can still possess another body. Moreover, I have a 100% success rate, Ashali said with a faint smile. When Yi Qin heard this, the last bit of goodwill he had for Ashali because she didn't attack the high-ranking guards under her command instantly disappeared without a trace. Ashali, you didn't take your only chance to live. Instead, you threatened me. I don't care who you're doing this for, or why you're doing this. Today you must die. After Yi Qin finished speaking, he stabbed the Godslayer in his right hand at Ashali without hesitation. The thick, black Godslayer weapon pierced through Ashali's head in an instant. At that moment, a white bear's soul burrowed out of Ashali's head. The bear's soul, which had just emerged, glared coldly at Yi Qin and roared angrily. Yi Yu of Gojoseon, you'll regret this. However, at that moment, the Godslayer that had pierced through Ashali's head suddenly flashed with a dark light. At the same time, a powerful devouring force appeared out of thin air and swept toward the bear's soul. What is this? The bear's soul roared in horror. However, in the next second, the bear's soul was completely devoured by the Godslayer. Ding! Congratulations to player Yi Qin for successfully killing the Polar Bear Empire's special person, Ashali. Player Yi Qin is rewarded with 1,000 innate attribute points. Chapter 961. Yi Qin sneered as soon as the system's notification ended. You won't die if you don't seek death. Why do you have to threaten me when you have the chance to live? Thinking up to this point, Yichen looked at the battlefield. The Polar Bear Empire's players kept reviving, but they kept getting killed. Almost 4 times, 1 or 2 more times, and it will be enough. Yichen flew back to the reincarnation immortal city. After 10 minutes, Yichen looked at the azure dragon in the sky and shouted, "Attack! Destroy the city." The moment Yichen finished his words, the azure dragon, which had just killed hundreds of millions of Polar Bear Empire's players, opened its mouth and spat at the capital city of the Polar Bear Empire. In the next second, a gray cloud flew out of the azure dragon's mouth and flew toward the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion sounded, and the city wall of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city was blown into dust. As the wind blew, dust flew everywhere, revealing the spacious streets of the Polar Bear Empire's capital. On the streets, the native soldiers of the Polar Bear Empire had been turned into dried corpses and scattered with the wind. At this moment, the native soldiers of the Polar Bear Empire who weren't killed by the Azure Dragon battle formation cycle of life and death were all stunned. They had seen the 10,000-foot-long Azure Dragon in the sky before, and they had also discussed it in shock because of its appearance. However, they couldn't see the scene of the Azure Dragon's massacre due to their location and the fact that there was no one to send the messages. As a result, they didn't have a clear judgment of the Azure Dragon's attack. Now, they saw the Azure Dragon's attack. It was brutal, domineering, and terrifying. A single puff of gray air destroyed one of the walls of the capital city of the Polar Bear Empire. It also took the lives of tens of millions of soldiers. Moreover, all the people who were killed were turned into dried corpses and scattered with the wind. How could the native soldiers of the Polar Bear Empire not be stunned by such a shocking scene? Roar! An earth-shattering dragon roar suddenly sounded. Then, the Azure Dragon that destroyed one of the city walls of the Polar Bear Empire's capital city descended from the sky. Boom! The 10,000 feet long Azure Dragon disappeared and revealed the 2,410,000 Reincarnation Immortal City Army. At the front of the Reincarnation Immortal City, Zhao Yun, Dianwei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Huang Zhong, Gao Shun, Zhang Liao, and the other generals exchanged glances with one another. They raised their weapons and yelled, "Kill! Kill! Kill! Kill!" The army of the Reincarnation Immortal City roared. Then, the army of the Reincarnation Immortal City followed closely behind Zhao Yun, Dianwei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Huang Zhong, Li Yuanba, and other generals as they charged toward the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. Rumble! 10,000 horses galloped, and the earth rumbled. At the location of the Eastern Player Army, the eyes of the Eastern players lit up when they saw the Reincarnation Immortal City's army attacking the Polar Bear Empire's capital. "Ha! It's finally our turn. What are you waiting for? Charge! Kill these Polar Bear Empire's players." After a series of shouts, the army of Eastern players turned into a raging tide and charged toward the Polar Bear Empire's players who had just revived on the battlefield. At the location of the Polar Bear Empire's players, the Polar Bear Empire's players, who were in despair, were stunned when they realized that the 10,000 feet long Azure Dragon had disappeared. Then, they saw the army of Eastern players charging toward them in a frenzy. "Damn it! It's bad enough that Yi Chun bullied us, but these damn Eastern players are trying to take advantage of us. Damn it, these bastards. They want to use us as monsters to farm. What should we do? Should we retreat first? We've been killed 5 or 6 times, and each of us has lost 50 or 60 levels. We can't fight against the Eastern players. It's no use running. There are too many Eastern players, and we can't outrun the Eastern players. Then let's fight it out with them. Yes, let's fight. Kill as many as we can. If we're lucky, we might be able to make up for all the lost experience by killing the Eastern players." That's right. There's nothing to be afraid of in a free-for-all. Let's kill them. After the clamor, the Polar Bear Empire's players charged toward the Eastern players with bloodshot eyes. Soon, the two armies of players clashed and started fighting fiercely. Unfortunately, no matter how hard the Polar Bear Empire's players fought, They could not kill any of the Eastern players. It could not be helped. The difference in level was too great. In addition, the Eastern players had picked up items from Yi Chen's corpse, and each of them was equipped with at least diamond-grade equipment. Therefore, the Polar Bear Empire's players were crushed. In the capital of the Polar Bear Empire, shouts, cries, clashing weapons, begging for mercy, and the sound of warhorses galloping on the ground intertwined and formed a unique battlefield sonata. As the battlefield sonata continued to play, the Polar Bear Empire's soldiers fell in droves and turned into corpses lying on the cold ground. As far as the eye could see, there was scarlet blood everywhere. Twisted corpses were everywhere. A gentle breeze blew, and the smell of blood surged. In less than 10 minutes, the Polar Bear Empire's capital fell into a hell of blood and fire. The ones who caused this were Yi Chen's reincarnation Immortal City's army. No one showed mercy, and no one stopped, because everyone knew that their lord, Yi Chen, only had one order, and that was to kill them all and not leave a single one alive. As time passed, there were fewer and fewer native soldiers left in the capital of the Polar Bear Empire. It was only when the last native soldier was killed that the army of the reincarnation Immortal City charged into the imperial palace of the Polar Bear Empire. An hour later, except for the Emperor and the Empress, everyone in the Polar Bear Empire's royal palace was killed by the reincarnation Immortal City's army. In the reincarnation Immortal City's city lord's residence, Yi Chen's divine sense shrouded Du Chun of the Polar Bear Empire. He glanced at the Emperor and the Empress of the Polar Bear Empire, who were forced to kneel on the ground by the soldiers. Kill! As soon as Yi Chun gave the order, the soldiers who were escorting the Emperor and the Empress of the Polar Bear Empire directly chopped off their heads. At this moment, the system's notification suddenly sounded. Ding! Congratulations to player Yi Chun for successfully destroying the Polar Bear Empire and obtaining all of the Polar Bear Empire's Heaven and Earth Providence. As soon as the system's notification ended, Yi Chen's Heaven and Earth Providence instantly skyrocketed. Feeling the sudden surge of Heaven and Earth Providence, Yi Chen couldn't help but smile. This was his biggest gain. Chapter 962. Thinking up to this point, Yi Chen could not help but smile. At this moment, a world announcement suddenly sounded. Ding! The Great Han Empire's General of Agile Cavalry, Yi Chen, has breached the capital of the Polar Bear Empire and destroyed the Polar Bear Empire. Special reward to player Yi Chen X 3,000 innate attribute points. The world announcement was repeated 3 times in a row, instantly causing the entire world channel to explode. Damn, Yi Chen destroyed the Polar Bear Empire so quickly. Are you deaf? Can't you hear the world announcement? Damn, do you still have to ask? F*CK, use honorifics. F*CK, how dare you call Yu of Gojoseon by his name? Who the F*CK do you think you are? Ignore that idiot. He's just a moron. He thinks he's so awesome. Why don't he take a piss and look in the mirror to see what he's made of? Hee hee. King Yi is the most awesome. There is no other. Of course, I saw how Yu of Gojoseon attacked. F*CK. That scene was like a god descending from the heavens. It's a pity that Yu of Gojoseon doesn't accept followers. Otherwise, I would definitely be the first to seek refuge with Yu of Gojoseon. I want it too. Sigh, I've already begged so many times, but Yu of Gojoseon just won't open his mouth. I hope that Yu of Gojoseon will unify the real world and set the rules himself. That way, the real world will return to normalcy. I want that too. That way, whoever dares to disobey Yu of Gojoseon's orders will be courting death. That's for sure. Right now, Yu of Gojoseon is the most awesome person in the world. Even that light god was swallowed by Yu of Gojoseon. The world channel was in an uproar. After Yi Chen took a look, he couldn't help but frown. These people, in the previous world announcements, some spoke ill of me, some were envious, and some were jealous, but now they were all unified. When the players spoke, there was a name at the end of their words. At the beginning of the game, Yi Chen's realm wasn't high, so he couldn't remember many people. As Yi Chen's realm continued to soar, Yi Chen could easily recall what the people who spoke on the World Channel had said and who they were. It was because of this that Yi Chen noticed the abnormality when he saw the gamers' comments on the World Channel. Yi Chen wouldn't be suspicious if a portion of the people had changed their attitudes. But if the majority, or even everyone, had changed their attitudes, then something wasn't right. Otherwise, Yi Chen would not think this way. Someone must have told him to say that. Even if not all of them were like that, at least most of them were like that. Thinking of this, Yi Chen's gaze suddenly turned cold. Those large factions were really old and tired of living. Yi Chen thought this way not because Yi Chen was self-righteous or because Yi Chen was making random judgments. It was the truth. It had to be known that the current players could survive in the real world. An individual or a group of 3 to 5 players couldn't survive. If the players wanted to survive, they had to rely on large factions and live in the cities built by the large factions. They had to serve the large factions. Even if the individual players didn't want to be loyal to the large factions, they had to serve the large factions and follow the orders of the large factions. For example, being cannon fodder, fighting monsters, killing people, handing over items every day, etc. It could be said that the individual players didn't have any human rights and had very little autonomy. Of course, the powerful individual players were an exception, but this wasn't important. What was important was that only the large factions had the ability to control what the players said. Otherwise, how could Yi Chen attribute the sudden unified statement of the players to the large factions? As for why the large factions did this, others might not know, but how could Yi Chen not know? It was because they wanted Yi Chen to be beside himself because of the players' petition and complacent because of the players' performance of submission. Then, he would take the initiative to eliminate the demons in the real world. In this way, the real world would be completely stabilized and the large factions would choose to submit. At first glance, Yi Chen had become the emperor and had unlimited glory. But what was the truth? It wasn't like that at all, because Yi Chen couldn't possibly focus on the real world. And the submission of the large factions was just mouth and heart. It had to be known that in the hearts of all the large factions and ambitious players, there was a point of view. That was, everyone was a player and could constantly become stronger through the game. Why should they completely submit just because someone was temporarily strong? There was no need, it was impossible, and they couldn't accept it. In the eyes of all the large factions, as long as Yi Chen took action and resolved the crisis in the real world, then all the factions could obtain the same safe, living environment as Yi Chen. After that, all the factions could play the game steadily and seriously. Then, all the factions could secretly improve their own strength. Once the large factions caught up to Yi Chen, then their opportunity to rise up would come. As for how to rise up, it was very simple. Kill Yi Chen. This was the plan of the large factions. F*CK. These idiots, they really think I'm an idiot. Not to mention that I can't destroy the demons. Even if I could, why would I do it? There were many demons all over the world. If Yi Chen took action, he could definitely kill all the demons he encountered, but the remaining demons might not be wiped out. It had to be known that the number of demons was very terrifying. They outnumbered the number of humans by many times. Once Yi Chen began to kill a large number of demons, the players of the demon race would definitely inform each other, and then all the demons would go into hiding. In this way, it would be difficult for Yi Chen to kill the demons. Therefore, it would not be easy for Yi Chen to destroy the demons. Unless Yi Chen destroyed the earth, the demons would not be wiped out. As for Yi Chen saving humans for the so-called false reputation, for the so-called righteousness of the human race, for the so-called hero of mankind, that was nonsense. If there were not so many factions and ambitious people in the real world, Yi Chen might still do so. Unfortunately, this was only a hypothesis. The real situation was that after the meteor fell, people's hearts had changed. Many people had a dream of becoming strong in their hearts, and they also had a heart of desire that wanted to obtain everything. After the end of the World War, he would first wipe out these large factions. Thinking of this, Yi Chun smiled coldly. Then he looked directly at the army of reincarnation Immortal City in the capital of the Polar Bear Empire and shouted, "Return to the city and rest for a while. Later, we will attack Silla country." "Yes, my lord." Zhao Yun, Dian Wei, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Huang Zhong, and the other generals, as well as the soldiers of reincarnation Immortal City, heard this and bowed in unison. Chapter 963. After hearing the words of his subordinates, Yi Chun waved his right hand, and dozens of distorted spaces appeared in the capital of the Polar Bear Empire in an instant. In the next second, the army of the reincarnation Immortal City walked toward the distorted spaces in neat rows and then disappeared in groups. Great Han Empire, Luoyang, Imperial Palace. Reporting, a drawn-out voice suddenly sounded in the main hall. Then, a small eunuch soldier came to the main hall, looked at Lu Hong, and bowed. "Your Majesty, the envoy of the Polar Bear Empire has brought a letter of credence to Luoyang and wants to see your Majesty." The Polar Bear Empire? Lu Hong, who was sitting on the main seat, was stunned when he heard this. Zhang Rang, who was next to Lu Hong, smiled slightly and then bowed to Lu Hong. "Your Majesty, Yu of Beach is now attacking the Polar Bear Empire." Lu Hong's eyes lit up when he heard this. He then looked at Zhang Rang and asked, "Father, tell me. Father Rang, tell me, did my good son-in-law destroy the Polar Bear Empire? So the Emperor of the Polar Bear Empire wants to send someone to ask for peace?" "Your Majesty, this servant feels that Yu of Beach should have destroyed the Polar Bear Empire." Zhang Rang smiled flatteringly and then bowed. Lu Hong laughed and then said, "Father, tell me what you mean." "Father, I like to hear your words." "Ha ha." Although Lu Hong was greedy for money and was muddle-headed and tyrannical, he was also an emperor. As long as one was an emperor, they would like to have their name recorded in the annals of history. Therefore, Lu Hong very much liked to become an emperor of the ages. Yi Chun's expedition overseas to destroy countries other than the Great Han Empire and expand the territory of the Great Han Empire was undoubtedly poking at Lu Hong's sore spot. It was also for this reason that Lu Hong was so excited and happy. As soon as Lu Hong finished speaking, Zhang Rang immediately said flatteringly, "Your Majesty, I'm just saying. Your Majesty, I'm just saying. His Excellency King Yu has done it. Moreover, he has already destroyed Dongzhou and India. The current Great Han dynasty is incomparable to any other dynasty. Your Majesty, you're a great emperor." "Ha ha." Hearing this, Lu Hong looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. People like to listen to nice words, and when it came to Lu Hong, what he liked to hear the most was what Zhang Rang said. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. Congratulations, Your Majesty." All the civil and military officials bowed and bowed to Lu Hong in unison. In the past, all the civil and military officials in the court had different attitudes toward Yi Chun. But now, whether it was the wealthy, the humble, or the civil and military officials, they all admired Yi Chun from the bottom of their hearts, the Prince Yu of Han. In fact, it was hard for them not to admire Yi Chun. After all, Yi Chun had destroyed the East Continent and India. Although the East Continent was just a small country, India was not. If one were to calculate it carefully, the land area of India was almost 1/3 of the Great Han Empire. This was a rather large territory, and now this territory had already been incorporated into the Great Han Empire's territory. The question was, who could have achieved such great feats? No one at all. For generations, they could not even wipe out the foreign tribes at the border. But now, there was a super general in the Great Han Empire who had destroyed 2 countries in a row. Who would dare to disrespect him? No one dared to. That was the case both on the surface and in their hearts. As soon as the civil and military officials finished speaking, Lu Hong laughed even more heartily. After a while, Lu Hong looked at the eunuch who came to deliver the order and shouted, "Summon the envoy." The envoy of the Polar Bear Empire is to enter the hall. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Your Majesty." When the little eunuch heard this, he hurriedly bowed and saluted. After that, he hurriedly left the hall. Not long after, a travel-worn noble from the Polar Bear Empire came into the hall with a humble face. He then knelt before Lu Hong. Thud! After kneeling 3 times and kowtowing 9 times, the noble from the Polar Bear Empire bowed respectfully to Lu Hong. "Your humble subject, Jigger, pays his respects to the great emperor of the Great Han Empire." Lu Hong was stunned when he saw the way Jigger bowed. In the Great Han Empire, the ceremony of kneeling was basically only done during sacrificial ceremonies, ancestor worship, or some particularly grand festivals. Even if the subjects saw the emperor, they only bowed and did not need to kneel. But now, a noble from the Polar Bear Empire directly knelt as soon as he arrived at the hall. How could Lu Hong not be stunned? After coming back to his senses, Lu Hong's eyes lit up. He then looked at the noble from the Polar Bear Empire, Jigger, and asked, "You brought a letter of credence?" "Yes, your Majesty." When Jigger heard this, he did not dare to get up and hurriedly knelt again. When Zhang Rang, who was next to Lu Hong, heard this, he immediately stepped forward and took the letter of credence from Jigger. After checking and confirming that there was no poison or trap, Zhang Rang handed the letter of credence from the Polar Bear Empire to Lu Hong. Lu Hong opened the letter of credence from the Polar Bear Empire. After reading it for a while, his eyes lit up. He then hurriedly looked at Jigger and asked, "Your emperor said that the Polar Bear Empire is willing to submit to the Great Han Empire, pay tribute year after year, and give your princess to me?" When Jigger heard Lu Hong's words, he could not help but be stunned. In Jigger's opinion, the emperor of the Great Han Empire, Lu Hong, should be a dignified, far-sighted, and domineering emperor. But now, the feeling that Lu Hong gave him, no matter how he looked at it, was the aura of an incapable ruler. Although he did not understand, he did not dare to delay. After coming back to his senses, Jigger hurriedly kowtowed. "Yes, your Majesty the Great Han Emperor, our Polar Bear Empire sincerely wishes to submit to the Great Han. Your Majesty the Great Han Emperor, please have the Great Han Emperor withdraw his troops from the Polar Bear Empire as soon as possible." When Lu Hong heard this, he laughed heartily. At this moment, a messenger suddenly ran into the hall and bowed to Lu Hong, loudly prostrating, "Senior Brother Lu, I've been waiting for you. Your Majesty, urgent news from the border." When Lu Hong heard this, he was stunned for a moment before he shouted, "Speak." When a messenger heard this, he hurriedly bowed and said, "Your Majesty, you of Beach has destroyed the Polar Bear Empire and beheaded the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire, as well as the Emperor and Empress. He is now attacking Silla." What? When Lu Hong heard this, he could not help but be stunned. The nobles of the Polar Bear Empire who were kneeling on the ground were also shocked. He shouted, "How is that possible?" When Yi Chun was attacking the capital of the Polar Bear Empire, he received the order from Prince Zoros of the Polar Bear Empire and directly ran to the Great Han Empire through the teleportation formation. He wanted to hand over the letter of credence and arrange a marriage for peace so that the Polar Bear Empire would not be destroyed. Now that he had reached the Great Han Empire and handed over the letter of credence, he thought that his mission was complete and that the crisis of the Polar Bear Empire would be resolved. Who would have thought that the Polar Bear Empire would be destroyed? How could the nobles of the Polar Bear Empire not be shocked when they heard this result? How could they not be afraid? "Your Majesty, Yi Yu of Gojoseon beheaded the emperor without permission. This is a great crime of disrespect." He Jin, who was walking to court with a cane, suddenly thought of something. He threw away his cane and bowed to Lu Hong. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.